with the red arrows. And yes, that is mostly a brag and mostly just an excuse to show the best photo of me that will ever be taken in my life. Like, have you ever looked at a photo of yourselves and thought it's all downhill from here? Because it is. One more caveat. For those of you who've been to a Royal Institution discourse before, you'll know there are generally two types. There is one where a researcher with a PhD and an associate professorship talks about their research, and there is one where someone in arts and culture shares their experience. This is more of the latter. Some of what I say is going to be opinion and not fact, and hopefully this audience will be able to tell the difference. There are points in here where I explicitly say I do not have all the answers. And I also want to add one conflict of interest note as well. My company gets a lot of its revenue from the adverts that go on and around YouTube videos, which means that my rent is indirectly paid by Google Ireland. I can't imagine why it's in Ireland. Just no reason at all why they'd set up there instead of the UK. Not a word of this discourse has been passed by anyone in Google. They don't even know I'm doing it. I'm not employed by them, but ultimately, while I'm willing to irritate that company and bite the hand that feeds me, they are indirectly paying my rent. I can try to represent the folks who have not been as lucky, who the algorithm has turned against, but I'm quite happy with them right now, and a lot of other people aren't. So anyway, that's the plan. This is the state of science communication in the English-speaking world at the end of the second decade of the 21st century. And to understand how it works, we need to start with the algorithm. Algorithm, in this context, means quite a bit different from what people with a lot of experience in mathematics and computer science might think it does. The algorithm is referred to in the singular, which is the almost anthropomorphized name that's given to this collection of machine learning systems. I went to a conference for science communicators last year, and after about 3 or 4 hours, we realized that we had to ban the word from conversation, because while a lot of folks from YouTube would just sort of endlessly froth about it, anyone not on the platform just found it confusing and messy, and we would not shut up. So when I talk about the algorithm, I'm talking about this sort of almost magical black box of code. And the idea is that you set up this black box and then you provide it with a list of human-curated examples. And it works out their distinguishing features, provides some sort of categorization system, and then as you throw novel examples at it, it categorizes them and learns from feedback. And those distinguishing features may be completely novel or completely unknown to humans. So one of Google's recent AI projects was looking at retinal photography. And this recent paper claims that with uncanny accuracy, it was able to look at retinal photos and work out gender, with sex with 97% accuracy, age within 4 years, and better than chance at smoking status, blood pressure, major adverse cardiac events. Eye doctors now cannot detect any of those things themselves. They're not really sure how the machine did it. Now, it's right to be skeptical of some of those claims. Maybe there's a difference in the metadata. Maybe the retinal photography machine, I guess that's technically a camera, is set up or focused differently depending on some of those attributes. But the paper does a pretty good job of covering their bases there. And maybe a human could also be trained to pick out those differences. It's just that nobody's bothered when you can just look at the chart next to the patient. But the simplest black box machine learning system is essentially categorizing pictures. You give it a load of pictures of cats, and you give it a load of pictures of things that are not cats, and then you ask it, is this new picture a cat? Which sounds like it's going to be useless unless you're trying to design a filter for adult content, and you're sending it pornography and not pornography, and the aim is to have a classifier that can look at a photo it's never seen before and work out whether you should show that to all ages or not. Of course, it's not that simple. There are stories after stories after stories of machine learning systems that have failed through bad training data or, more likely, biased training data. And this is slightly outside my ballpark. I know Hannah Fry covered this in her lecture here a while ago, but I have I have an example that's very close to my heart. YouTube uses a machine learning system to try and detect whether videos are suitable for advertisers to place their adverts next to. It was rolled out a little bit too fast and a before it was entirely ready, because YouTube had had one of the many little scandals that they have, and they needed to do something to reassure their advertisers. So this is a highly abridged summary based on unofficial conversations and innuendo and scuttlebutt. I'm breaking no NDAs here, but the story goes that they provided the machine learning system with a big block of videos that were definitely 100% safe for advertisers. And then they gave it a big block that were definitely not. And they told the system to be fairly conservative because it was only a first line of defense. If it deemed your video unsuitable, you could send it off to humans for review. And this is, in my industry, a fairly controversial thing to say, but I don't think that's an unreasonable solution to a very difficult problem. YouTube has 500 hours of content. 500 hours of video, I'm not saying content. YouTube has 500 hours of video uploaded every minute. That's a human lifetime every single day. It is not unreasonable to have a machine learning system be the first line of defense, as long as there's a human review behind it. And nowadays it's working fairly well with some high-profile exceptions. But the problem, so I'm told, was that there was a bias in the training data. Channels, people, talking about LGBT issues were more likely to talk explicitly about sex in some of their videos. Not all of them, not the majority of them, but enough that the machine learning system figured out there was a correlation between people talking about LGBT stuff and people talking about explicit sex. Again, only in a small number of videos, but enough that when the machine learning system found something to be about being gay, it viewed it as more likely to be unsafe. Now, the YouTube CEO said in a recent interview, we work incredibly hard to make sure that when our machines learn something, because a lot of our decisions are made algorithmically, that our machines are fair. I know some YouTube employees, I'm friends with some YouTube employees. I believe that they work incredibly hard to minimize that bias, but it's still there. And algorithmic bias is a major concern for every single machine learning system. The systematic biases in the wider world have already found their way to social media without machine learning being involved. Of the top 10 earning creators on YouTube right now, as of 2018, as of last year, of the top 10, all of them are male, and I'm well aware that I'm in the Royal Institution giving this talk. One of the reasons that I got that audience in the first place, one of the reasons I ended up standing here, is because I'm a white guy with a British accent that sounds authoritative. Trying to make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't inherit these systemic biases is an incredibly difficult job. And it's one for Hannah Fry and her crew, and not for someone who got a linguistics degree. When YouTube handed over that recommendation engine to machine learning, they set it to increase watch time. This is what they told everyone. If people stuck around watching your video all the way to the end, it was 20 minutes long, then it was viewed as good by the system, at which point they fell foul of Goodhart's law. When a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So people made longer videos, and they put all the important stuff at the very end, forcing people to watch all the way through. So worse videos were being recommended. So now, YouTube's official line is that they reward high-quality videos that keep people on platform. Now, that may not be videos on the same channel by the same creator in the same genre. In 2017, Jim McFadden, who was then technical lead for YouTube recommendations, he talked about the new engine they had that came from a department wonderfully called Google Brain. One of the key things it does, he says, is it's able to generalize. Whereas before, if I watched this video from a comedian, our recommendations were pretty good at saying, here's another one just like it. But the Google Brain model figures out the other comedians who are similar, but not exactly the same, even more adjacent relationships. It's able to see patterns that are less obvious. And as for which videos to recommend, well, one of the new model's basic ideas is that if someone comes to YouTube because of your video, tick, that's a good thing. And if someone does not leave YouTube because of your video, does not stop watching, that's a good thing. So the black box takes in those signals and it works out what's going to keep people on our platform, what's going to keep them watching the videos and, again, more importantly for Google, watching the adverts in between. Incidentally, apparently Google also serves more adverts to people who are more tolerant to adverts. If you'd like two adverts to appear less often before your video, skip them more. That was bad advice to give for someone who makes his money from that. Because you've got to remember, like all these big companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, they are essentially advertising companies. Almost all their revenue comes from being the greatest marketing, advertising, targeting company that the world has ever seen. Their ideal is that every advert is perfectly targeted to you. And as all of you will be aware, they haven't got there yet. But it turns out if you reward videos that keep people on platform, then what you end up with is conspiracy theories and clickbait. And yes, all of the companies that have algorithms are working on fighting disinformation because they are aware that it's a public relations disaster for them. But they are doing it in English first. We'll get back to that later. From a creative perspective, the algorithm is often seen as being a bit like a Skinner box. It's an operant conditioning chamber. It is a food dispenser that might give you some money if you tap the lever enough. Google and YouTube and Twitter will never tell you what their algorithm is looking for, because every bit of information they give away means that there's more opportunity for people to abuse it and send spam. But from my perspective, the pellets come out at random and we all develop sort of superstitions and we all keep pushing the lever. I was lucky enough this year to have a conversation with the head of product for recommendations at Google, the person in charge of the algorithm. And it seems like the idealized version of what they want for that sort of recommendations that appear next to your video is that it's a bit like, and this is something that shows my age, it's a bit like a TV guide. It's a bit like the Radio Times. Every single channel should always have something on it that is interesting to you, all the time. It should be a transparent glass layer between the audience and what they want to see. And the question is, as they're weighing up all those videos, how much they put their finger on the scale, how much they make that TV guide be for the worthy, honesty, truth-seeking version of you, and not the clickbait conspiracy version of you. Because ultimately, yes, sometimes you want to watch a documentary, but sometimes you want to watch someone trip over and hurt themselves, like You've Been Framed existed for a reason. And I'm not just talking about YouTube. I'm talking about Twitter. I'm talking about every single algorithmic system out there. If all they're recommending is quick, short dopamine hits that just get you in, get you out, then that's not a long-term survival strategy. That spirals down into the lowest common denominator, which ultimately hurts the world. But if they don't have some of that in there, then people are going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to the company that does have that. If everything is painstakingly verified and educational, then only a minority of folks are going to watch it. Finding that balance, finding that solution. I said there were going to be analogies to older media. That's what TV commissioners still do. It's what the people programming the YouTube algorithm are trying to do. And let's be clear, it's an unsolvable problem. There is not some magical equilibrium in the middle that will make this work. It's about finding a balance. It is about finding the least worst option. You cannot have a successful platform that is all clickbait, but you also can't have a successful platform with no clickbait. Because either way, advertisers are going to leave, viewers are going to tire of it, and it's not sustainable long term. There have been plenty of investigations into the effects of the algorithm. Plenty of research, formal and informal, that showed how you could very, very easily go from something apolitical and then click again and find something just slightly political. And then click again and find something that's a little bit clickbait, but still honest. And then maybe something that's about moderately conservative politics that's a little bit untrue. And then on the next click, find something about why Hillary Clinton is evil and Donald Trump is the greatest thing to ever happen to the universe, or vice versa. The most notable recent investigation into online radicalization is this deep dive by the New York Times. And like I say, the companies are working in English first because the New York Times looked into radicalization in Brazil. And it includes one of the most sobering paragraphs I've seen in a while. Right-wing YouTubers had hijacked already viral Zika conspiracies and added a twist. Women's rights groups, they claimed, had helped engineer the virus as an excuse to impose mandatory abortions. Quoting Zeynep Tufekci, who was referring to research in the Wall Street Journal, videos about vegetarianism, led to videos about veganism. Videos about jogging led to videos about running ultramarathons. It seems as if you are never hardcore enough for YouTube's algorithm. It promotes, recommends, and disseminates videos in a manner that appears to constantly up the stakes. Given its billion or so users, YouTube may be one of the most powerful radicalizing instruments of the 21st century. I worry quite a lot about how complicit I am in that. Ben McCohen-Wilson, he's YouTube's UK managing director, had an interview. And obviously he disagrees with that. He says that the platform reduces the spread of content designed to mislead people and raises up authoritative voices. Note that he didn't say that those voices were true or that those voices were correct. He said they were authoritative. There's an old Jonathan Swift quote, and it took quite a lot of research to prove that this actually was a Jonathan Swift quote. Falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. Quick show of hands, who saw this tweet? Few people? Yeah, there's about 10 or 12 in the audience. I mean, it did great numbers. The idea that Marmite, you lay the bottle on the side to get it out, that did great numbers. Who here saw the confession and the retraction? All right, about half as many people. Good. Sure, that's pretty much harmless. By the way, that this actually was a Jonathan Swift quote. Falsehood flies. Few people? Yeah, there's about... Who saw this tweet? Few people? Yeah, there's about 10 or 12 in the audience. I mean, it did great numbers. That's pretty much harmless. By the way, that is now the Marmite guy. That's what he's known as. Everyone assumed that had been fact-checked by someone, because it's not that important, right? But everyone always assumes that, particularly if it agrees with our preconceptions. I mean, the long-term solution is to teach information literacy in schools, but as a real-world education policy, that's about as useful as saying we should reduce our carbon emissions. It's true. How do we get there? I don't have the answer to that. Douglas Adams, in his novel Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, came up with the idea of a fictional bit of software called Reason, which is a program which allowed you to specify in advance which decision you wanted it to reach and only then give it all the facts. And the program's job, which it was able to accomplish with consummate ease, was simply to construct a plausible series of logical-sounding steps to connect the premises with the conclusion. In the novel, it was sold to the Pentagon, highly classified, and it explained why they spent so much on Star Wars missile defense. If you would like to be convinced of a thing, YouTube and Twitter and all the other networks will happily find you people to convince you. If you've lost your faith in God, then there will be happily dozens of evangelical preachers from all sorts of denominations who will happily bring you back into the fold, and dozens of angry atheists who will make sure you stay out of it. Take your pick, which way you want to fall. If you want to know who's to blame for what's wrong with the world right now, then I can find you hundreds of people who will get you apoplectically angry at billionaires or immigrants or both. Whichever way you want to go, there will be someone authoritative to tell you about it. So, how do we define that authority? There used to be gatekeepers. Or at least it seemed like there used to be gatekeepers. Science communication was in magazines and television and radio, and it meant that there wasn't any significant peer review system out there, but you knew that there were researchers at the back and standards and quality to keep these things fairly accurate. There were professionals. There was David Attenborough, there was James Burke, and a lot of other men, and they were all men who were all giving authority with the BBC to back them up. Which is certainly true, but for every planet Earth or connections, somewhere on a channel there would be an ancient mysteries or an in search of or ancient aliens. The Bible code became a phenomenon in the 1990s. This was the idea that there were certain hidden messages in the scriptures that could be tracked if you just went through it exactly the right number of letters in a row. The Daily Mail loved that. They put it right on their front page, a splash above the headline, not because it was true, but because they knew it'd sell newspapers. We had gatekeepers. We definitely did have gatekeepers, but I'm not convinced that from the public's perspective, it was all that different to what we have today. Authority online, often comes from having an audience. You know, why am I standing here giving this talk today? It's not because I've done 15 years of painstaking research into this stuff and that I'm now presenting my doctoral thesis to you. It's not because I have a particularly broad range of knowledge or depth of knowledge. It's because I've worked with the Royal Institution before that, you know I can present. I wouldn't pretend to know your motivations, Sean, but I think it's safe to say that I'm partly here because you knew you could sell tickets and you knew you'd get some clicks online from it, from having me associated with this. I'm not saying that's all of it. I'm saying that was probably a consideration. There is a reason that every major British documentary about space for the last 15 years has been presented by Professor Brian Cox. Except it's not just documentaries about space. That's Wonders of Life. That was about natural history. Sorry, I'm just going to take a moment. Oh, good, there he is. That joke would have landed a lot better if that had come up at the right time. Can we just take a minute to appreciate how bad the Photoshop job is, by the way? The lighting doesn't match. He's got a halo around his head, and that right arm isn't even cut out properly. It's an official BBC press photo. Anyway, this was billed as a physics-based approach to natural history. And yes, it did cover some pretty advanced physics concepts, but let's be honest, from a television commissioner's perspective, it's a bit of a reach. It was almost certainly an excuse to provide Brian Cox on television to the audience who want him to get those ratings in. I'm sure it was well researched. I'm sure they did a really good job of it, but Wonders of Life, with the extremely qualified dual biologist and astrophysicist no one's heard of, would not have had as many people watching it, and it would have been much harder to commission. How much is it worth to get someone less qualified but known to the audience rather than the best person for the job? Sister Wendy was not some great art historian. Her degree was in English. But in the 1990s, she presented 5 BBC series on art history because audiences liked her and would listen to her. In her obituary, the New York Times said her insightful, unscripted commentaries connected emotionally with millions. Danny Beck, a Norwegian neuroscientist, recently said this: "Your desire for a platform or interest in several sciences should not supersede your responsibility and ethical duty to not speak on topics you are not qualified to. There exist others who know better and can do the job. Consider amplifying their voice instead." And I agree with that, which is why the rest of this lecture will be No, it won't. But just for a moment, you believed me, and how did you feel about paying to come here and see that? Like the early videos in my educational series were the stereotypical guy who hasn't done his research and thinks he knows everything, spouting unsourced facts. There are still a heck of a lot of people who stand in front of a green screen or use voiceover and stock footage and provide no citations and no references and just ask people to trust them. I learned quickly not to do that, but the trouble is, sort of what the audience want. A loyal audience, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, does not want to see someone else's voice amplified. If I hit the retweet button on Twitter, I just take someone else's message wholesale with their face, I send it out to my audience, few people will pass it onwards. If I quote tweet it, if I take their message and then I add a bit of useless commentary around it with my face, that goes much further. Way more people interact, way more people pass it on. YouTube gives creators retention statistics. We get to see, on average, where people stay and leave a video. I will note that that chart does go up to 120%. Couple of reasons for that. One is that sometimes people go back and watch a bit again. That counts twice, that can go above. But also, it's because YouTube's graphing API just isn't good at percentages. There's a big drop-off in the first few seconds up there. It's not as people go, oh, I don't like that, or I don't like him, or this isn't what I thought. There's a big drop-off in the end, what's now called the end card and was once called the credits. But apart from that, just a steady slope downwards as people get bored. And the algorithm will look kindly on you if that slope is less steep. But if I go somewhere on location and I hand over to experts and experts carry most of the video, that graph will be steeper and retention will be lower. People will get bored more quickly and they'll share the video less. So how much do you pander to your audience? How much do you tell them what they want to hear, particularly when on YouTube there is literally a dollar amount attached to each video and attached to each view? How much do you make what your audience wants at a social cost? You know, it's not just the viewers being sent down a rabbit hole of radicalization. It's also the creators. When you look at clickbait that brings in numbers and money, it can be very, very tempting to just cut your losses, double down on the clickbait and accept that, well, make money while it's coming in. Make hay while the sun shines, because in a couple of weeks, it could all go away. But the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. In 1988, Jimmy Cauty and Bill Drummond, the KLF, wrote How to Have a #1 the Easy Way, the manual. They'd had a novelty pop song hit the top of the charts a few months earlier, and the manual was a tongue-in-cheek guide to success in the music industry, how to achieve a #1 with no money and no musical talent, which they said themselves that they'd managed. Almost all of it is out of date now. There's a wonderful section a couple of chapters in which says that by the mid-90s, someone in Japan will have invented a machine that lets you do this all from home without a recording studio. That was right. But at the very start, the little bit that is as true now as it was when it was written. The majority of #1s are achieved early in the artist's public career, before they've been able to establish reputations and build a solid fan base. Most artists are never able to recover from having one, and it becomes the millstone around their necks to which all subsequent releases are compared. Either the artists will be destroyed in their attempt to prove to the world there are other facets to their creativity, or they succumb willingly and spend the rest of their lives as a traveling freak show, peddling a nostalgia for those now far off, carefree days. The Cheeky Girls. They wrote that 10 years before the Cheeky Girls. They wrote that 10 years, 20 years before YouTube came along, and it's exactly true for people online. A #1 does not create a career, it can kill a career. If you've just got one hit, all the world will want to see is that one thing. A single video does not make you a YouTube star. A single tweet does not get you a book deal. Although, to be honest, that hasn't happened in 5 years anyway. A #1 just makes you the person who repeats that catchphrase until everyone is tired of it. What you want to do is build up a catalogue of minor hits over time, get a little bit of respect, hone your trade, learn your craft, and then, once you've got a bit of an audience, then you can start aiming upwards. Bands and singers in the music industry is actually a really good analogy for how the internet works right now. After all, you know, Brian Cox does arena tours and arena shows and tours around the world. For the folks out there who are hoping to communicate science to the world, it is like starting a band or launching a music career or going out solo and singing. It will not pay the rent for the first few years or decades or maybe even ever. And if you are one of the lucky ones, if you make it, it will not set you up for life. And if you're an organization trying to get your message out, well, I used to think that people had a built-in corporate baloney detector. I used to think that anything that was put out by an institution or by an advertising agency was doomed to fail just because it wasn't authentic. And that's not true. That's not true at all. You know, remember what I said earlier, 500 hours of video per minute, not watched, uploaded. You know, 82 years of video content a day, and most of it took the most popular recurring series that I do right now is very simple. That's sped up, obviously. It is a 10-minute, one-take monologue to the camera about computer science. The camera does not move, the camera does not cut away. There are none of those jump cuts that a lot of people use. I can now completely understand why they do them. It's a lot easier. There are occasional graphics sometimes, but mostly it's just me and the camera. And that breaks all the rules established by television when I grew up. It breaks all the rules that corporate media types think that they need to make this work. It's not about spectacle. It's about people. To explain that, we need to talk about parasocial relationships. The term parasocial relationship was invented by these two, Donald Horton and Richard Vole. Should really have fact-checked that. The term means that there is a difference between the spectator, the viewer, as we now call them, and the performer, what we now call the creator. That the spectator is emotionally invested in the person on screen, but the person on screen has no idea that the spectator exists. And if they do, there's such a power imbalance there that it couldn't possibly be a friendship. Parasocial relationships are not a new thing, and neither is turning them into money. Any celebrity that ever had an official fan club with a membership fee was doing exactly that. Actually, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a fad for celebrities to set up phone numbers that were their personal number or their personal voicemail. And some of them made a lot of money from it. That's Corey Feldman and Corey Hart. And if you think I didn't track down that advert to play it halfway through to get everyone's attention back, you're completely wrong.
You can listen to their private phone messages and get their personal number where you can leave them a message of your own. $2 the first minute, 45 cents each additional minute. Ask your parents before you call.
Yeah. I haven't tested the number. I don't imagine it works anymore. But those celebrities didn't have Twitter. Twitter is effectively someone's personal number. If you know that a celebrity is always on their phone, always typing on their computer, sending their thoughts out to the world, well, why not reply? Send them a message. They might notice it. They might actually reply to you personally. You know, you might get attention from them. And suddenly it's not a weird parasocial relationship. They're your friend. More than that, because it's on social media, you can try to get that attention, you can try to get that over-the-top fandom, but it's also performative. It can also be competitive. All the fans can now see each other doing this. I have a couple of friends who have that sort of terrifying Beatlemania-esque fandom, that sort of kids screaming at Take That concerts, except they're not just folks around magazines now in small groups. They're not kids who come for a concert and scream at their idols and then disperse. They have notifications on for when their idol tweets so they can get the first reply in. They have group chats whose only distinguishing characteristic for the people in there is that they're all fans of this person. If you've ever wondered why kids would rather sit and watch a stream of someone playing a video game rather than just play the game themselves, it's not about the game. It's about the person playing it. A stream of a video game on its own isn't interesting, but someone you know or someone you think you know playing a video game, just hanging out with a friend, with a chat next to it. And if in that chat, that's a lot of friends hanging out. You're all just hanging out together, except that one of you has a lot more power and influence than the others, and often is indirectly asking for money. You'll notice that I'm not using any slides during this bit. I don't want to call out any particular individuals for what is basically just hustling. Patreon and Twitch subscriptions and YouTube memberships, all these tools they have to raise money for individual people are not inherently a bad thing. Patreon has meant that science communicators are able to support themselves despite the fact that sometimes their content is not advertiser friendly. So people who are talking about sex education or mental health or ancient weapons can all get money for their content and perhaps even not have to hold down a separate job because individuals out in the world have thought, this should exist and I'm willing to donate money to make that happen. Animators, writers, podcasters, the sorts of people who work incredibly hard and are only able to make what they do because people have chosen to support them. That is a brilliant thing. But when it starts to get unsettling, when it starts to get a little bit weird, is when it becomes not about supporting someone's craft, but about selling friendship. And if you think it's weird when I put it that way, yeah, you should. It's really weird. If you watch one of the really popular video game streamers on Twitch, which is a platform that is just video game streaming, you'll see they're almost always talking. They're watching the chat, they're reacting to the messages that are coming in, they're reading them out loud, they're replying to them, they're calling out the names that they've seen, they're greeting people who have been hanging around in that group for a long, long time. They are being friendly and open and on for hours at a time, performing exhausting emotional labor. They will thank anyone who sends them a tip, or even better yet, subscribes, because in a world where Netflix costs $13 a month, subscriptions to a single person on Twitch can be $5 or $10 or $25 a month. And depending on what you pay, that might affect what perks you get back and what attention you get. And if someone does repeat their subscription, join again, then they can choose to announce it to the whole stream. A little animation that says how long they've been subscribed for. You'll see people on Twitch say, hey, so-and-so, thanks for being part of the cult for 4 years. That's literally language I heard while researching this. That seems normal to anyone embedded in that culture. Now, if you're a science communicator, it won't be quite that much, but it might get you behind the scenes access. You know, you might get to see someone's videos early and put some comments in, or get your name in the credits. It might give you access to a special members-only private chat room, or if you're giving someone maybe $50 a month, maybe there'll be a private video chat with the creator just for the folks who are spending that much money. Maybe that is okay. Maybe that's the way that social norms are going now, and I'm the old guy looking at that going, what on earth are the kids up to? That might be the case. But it can be, essentially, selling friendship. And again, it doesn't have to be. There are people who use it purely, a lot of people, who use it purely as a way of funding their work. But here is some of the advice that Patreon gives on how to get more people signed up for your monthly subscriptions. Bring your audience along for the ride by sharing pics, videos, and anecdotes from your life. Get vulnerable within reason. An emotional connection to you as the creator can be key in converting a fan to a patron. An emotional connection can be key in converting a fan to a patron. There is a very, very blurred line between being a fan of someone's work and being a fan of someone. And that's a line I find really uncomfortable. Because in part, my brain doesn't do parasocial relationships. It never has. Maybe there's something wrong up here. But there is to me a huge distinction between I'm a fan of X's work and I'm a fan of X. And I know linguistically they can be shortened, but those are to me very separate concepts. I like the work of Derren Brown, mentalist, magician. I have shamelessly cribbed some of the techniques that I use in talks, some of the tricks I use, not like magic tricks, but some of the rhetorical tricks, shamelessly from his live shows. The idea of setting something up at the start and letting the audience forget it and then bringing it back at the end and revealing it's the key to the whole thing. I have blatantly ripped that off Derren Brown more than once. I thoroughly enjoy his work. I think he's a great entertainer. But I don't give a damn about the man himself because I don't know him. He's a stranger. Parasocial relationships and everything about the way that these one-way, one-to-many relationships work blur that line in the service of greater profit. I have a strong memory from when I was a kid, maybe about that tall, being asked in school to write something about a personal hero. And I didn't have any. With the benefit of adult hindsight, obviously the cop-out option was to talk about my parents, but as the kids around me wrote about sporting heroes or actors or whoever, I just sat there stumped. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized to most people, liking someone's work and liking someone are the same thing. And that was blindingly obvious to most people, I'm sure, but to young me, it was a revelation. There, that has revealed something personal and vulnerable within reason, thus helping create an emotional connection between me and the audience. Tick, the collection buckets will be by the door on the way out. God, it's like a cold breeze just came into the room. That was brilliant. So, why have I covered that in so much detail? What does all that have to do with science communication? It was worked out very early on in television history that the people who were good at getting an audience were not the people who went, ladies and gentlemen. They were the people who went, hey, hello. They weren't the people who went, how are you all doing tonight? They were the people who looked down the camera and said, how are you? It's the difference between talking to the audience and talking to the viewer. There is a difference between a nature documentary with stock footage and a voiceover and a David Attenborough nature documentary. There is a difference between Wonders of Life and Brian Cox's Wonders of Life. Sound quality, factual accuracy, video quality, they all matter, but not nearly as much as having someone on screen who the audience can connect with. My friend, Dr. Simon Clark, vlogged his PhD at Oxford. For the more old school people in the audience, vlogged essentially means video diary. Simon now has a doctorate in atmospheric physics, and in 2018, he stopped making personal videos about his life in favor of science communication, and he wrote this post about why and how. And I just want to quote a little bit from it. The motivation of watching someone struggle with the monumental task of researching a PhD was mostly what attracted viewers to watch. I was the product. By that, I mean that my lived existence on Earth was a commodity, something to be bottled, refined, and sold. Simon's recent science communication videos are really good, but some of his audience didn't stick around. As he changed from talking about his life to talking about his work, he has had to build a new audience who are interested in that post-academia career of his and about the subjects he's interested in now. He's getting there. He's doing really well. Dr. Clark is in the minority because he's qualified to talk about his subject. For every one of him, there are countless people speculating or repeating misguided facts or just flat out lying or trying to shill essential oils by claiming they cure cancer. You would hope that it's the people like Dr. Clark that would be authoritative, but often that's not the case. Authority frequently comes from having an audience, and having an audience comes all too often from that parasocial, emotional connection with people. If you are going to try to talk science to the world as an anonymous voice or a corporation just saying words, it doesn't really matter how well cited your sources are or how groundbreaking your research is. You have to tell people about the human story that's in it. That's preferably your own. And to a certain extent, you have to be parasocial. So you may think, well, okay, on television we had gatekeeping. We did have that. There were certain standards. Surely it may well have been about parasocial relationships. There were occasional failures, but at least there were people we could relate to, even if they weren't technically qualified. And again, to be clear, most of the people who are doing this today are extremely qualified, and even if they're not, there is a whole team researching behind the scenes. But it's still the medium that gave us Most Haunted and Ghost Hunters. And even Most Haunted, you weren't watching because you're interested in ghosts. You're interested in watching the presenter go, ha! At something that wasn't there. And the online world is often seen as this uncontrolled, unmediated place where anyone can say anything about anyone. But the last few years have shown us that that's also not the case. Which brings me to the last main part of this, which is about echo chambers and Nazi bars. The final piece of the puzzle, working out why some lucky broadcasts go around the world and some don't, is talking about the people who pass them on. It's the groups in which someone can choose to amplify your voice or condemn it, where it's passed on, person to person to person, group to group to group. And some things are passed on because they're interesting or entertaining and for no more reason than that, but often it's because they support existing views, because it's reinforcing the in-group, or because it's diametrically opposed to those in-group's views and they can bond over despising it. Up there are the two extremes of online moderation. Let's talk about the Nazi bar first. This is what happens when a lot of sites are set up to be this sort of bastion of free speech, where anything legal, and by that they usually mean legal under United States law, anything legal is free to post. And you see this set up by the sort of well-meaning libertarian tech bros out of Silicon Valley. Reddit, which is one of the major hubs for discussion, at least among tech-savvy Americans, is perhaps the canonical example. They were set up as this perfect bulwark of free speech. If it is legal, Reddit will let you say it. Small groups in there might have their own rules, but other than that, it is a meritocracy. The best ideas will rise to the top, at which point, inevitably, the Nazis moved in. And that's not just a label. I'm not just slandering people with right-wing views there. I mean literal modern-day neo-Nazis. And unlike like many European countries, the US does not have a law against incitement to religious or racial hatred, so that was legal. So Reddit let them play. Free speech, they said, could be countered with more free speech, and as you might expect, that lasted until it started to affect their bottom line. When there was, finally, when advertisers were starting to have trouble with them, when there was finally a crackdown on the overtly, staggeringly racist discussion there, this was the quote from one of Reddit's co-founders, and it's kind of astonishing. "We didn't ban them for being racist. We banned them because we have to spend a disproportionate amount of time dealing with them." This isn't exclusive to Reddit, by the way. Facebook's moderation has been similarly lax and inconsistent, and somehow they've mostly got away with it. The inevitable conclusion of let anyone say anything is that the worst people, having finally found a place that will let them in, start to drive out the more careful and cautious. So the discussion swings a little bit more towards their views, which means that more moderate people leave. So it swings a little bit that way, and the cycle continues and continues and continues until eventually you realize that either the worst people will survive, or maybe the moderators might want to kick out the Nazis. This is the analogy to the Nazi bar, the local pub. It might be the greatest place in town, but if they let the Nazis meet in the basement, you're not going to want to go in there. Or at least you're not going to tell your friends you go in there. In 2015, Reddit conducted a survey of its users. They found the #1 reason that their users do not recommend the site, even though they use it themselves, is because they want to avoid exposing friends to hate and offensive content. So let's look at the other extreme, the echo chamber. For a better analysis of this, I would direct you to the work of Walter Quattrociocchi and the folks he works with from the Laboratory of Data Science and Complexity at Venice's Ca' Foscari University. I've mispronounced one of those words, I don't know which. In an echo chamber, there is definitely not free speech. No dissent is allowed. You see that in places like Facebook groups from multi-level marketing schemes and anti-vaxxers, where everyone has to buy in to the group's philosophy or else be branded a shill or a hater. Anyone with a dissenting opinion is shouted down by a large crowd, all of whom support each other in their views, whether that view happens to coincide with reality or not. And if all dissent is banned, you end up with a similar problem. The most obsessed, the most extreme radical believers chase out the people who aren't so sure. So the discussion on average starts to tolerate more extreme obsession and less dissent. And the cycle continues and continues and continues. And if those two failure modes sound similar, well, they sort of are. Both of those extremes are harmful. And note, I am not talking about political alignments here. I'm talking about the extreme edges of the policies that either allow anyone to say anything or allow no dissent whatsoever. And every major company that enables discussion has to pick where they sit, somewhere along that scale. So this is a post from a Florida-based natural medicine clinic that is selling homeopathic vaccines. I've anonymized them as best I can for obvious reasons. Their phone number shouldn't be up here. I think all of us here can agree that this is dangerous, and there will be wide-ranging views on whether that should be legal. I have to say they did get part of it right. Those are definitely safe for ages above 5. There is a concept on Twitter called the ratio. It's the number of replies you get to the number of likes to the number of retweets. If your retweets number is biggest, you have made something that has resonated and should be signal boosted and sent it out to the world. If your likes number is biggest, you've said something heartwarming or personal or emotional that people want to sympathize with but maybe don't want to send on to their friends. If your replies number is largest, like at the bottom of that tweet, you've probably said something that a lot of people disagree with. And a response like that is called getting ratioed. That homeopathic vaccine tweet was thoroughly ratioed. Those 132 replies are all people mocking it or occasionally clearly laying out why homeopathic vaccines are a bad thing, along with a scientific consensus. I think we can agree at the Royal Institution it's probably a good idea for homeopathic vaccines to get some pushback. But here's the problem. 132 people suddenly replying to that company, who usually gets literally 0 replies to anything, is algorithmically indistinguishable from a mass abuse pile-on targeting a vulnerable person. If some awful person with a moderately sized following says, "Hey, I hate that guy, go and mock him," then machine learning systems cannot tell the difference between abuse and a company getting pushback for selling homeopathic flu shots. Any policy decision that is designed to reduce abuse on Twitter, to stop vulnerable people being mass targeted, which is vital and needed, is also going to help the snake oil peddlers. I don't know where to draw that. Policy decisions about community standards are often seen about drawing that line somewhere between the echo chamber and the Nazi bar, but there's this idea that if the company just nudges the line a little bit that way or nudges it a bit that way, there will be a perfect solution that keeps everyone happy. And I'm really sorry to say it, but it's not true. Echo chamber and Nazi bar are not two polar opposites. They are both a gradient and they overlap in the middle. You cannot choose the best option. You can only choose the least worst. A slight tangent, but I think that's due in part to the centralization of the web that's happened over the last 20 years or so. In the early 2000s, every discussion site out there was on a different server, run by a different person, maybe in a different country with completely different rules. And in that way, it sort of reflected the systems we've got now in real life. You know, one of those sites might well allow, vulgar abuse and back and forth argument. Another of those sites might ban someone for even mild swearing. And this is how it works in the real world. There is a big difference between the conversation that football fans have chanting as they go into the stadium and the conversation, the hallowed halls of the Royal Institution. I assume there is, Sean. I haven't been here after the last Christmas lecture. I guess it gets a little bit messy, but that different register and different social norms is true for a lot of the bubbles within Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. You can have community norms within smaller subgroups, but all those subgroups are centralized on platforms run by enormous, mostly American corporations, so the community standards have to be standardized through all of them, and they have to be what the corporation or their advertisers or VC backers will support. You cannot establish massive cross-platform policies that allow every type of discussion, or in the case of YouTube comments, any type of discussion whatsoever. The problem is that while the communities can be small, the platforms they're on are too big and too centralized. Because, some people just kind of go onto it and it's just like, it's a nice little coffee shop. It's a friendly space for some people I know. I'm just going to talk to my friends. And then suddenly, boom, they get this attack from these other people who use Twitter as this massive shouting match forum. They will search out anyone using this particular hashtag, anyone with these opinions, and they will shout at them because that's the way they use the platform. And a few people have tried to federate this, as it's called. There's a network called Mastodon, which is basically Twitter in several different servers. They all have their own different rules and they all talk to each other, but running a server is complex and expensive, and joining Twitter is free and easy. And why would you not do that? There is something called Discord, which is the closest I think there is to those old web forums, those old bulletin boards. Each discussion section is locked off and private and just separated from the rest of the world. Sounds like a great plan. Sounds brilliant. It's great. And it might work for a lot of small groups, but it still has a single federated, a single sign-on across the whole network. Unintended consequences are rife if you try and play about with this stuff. YouTube recently had an algorithm change which, tried to raise up authoritative voices. Suddenly, if you were watching videos about climate change, then you might be sent to someone like the Royal Institution's videos, which are about the scientific consensus. Which means that suddenly, all the people who were climate deniers, who were already entrenched with their views, were being sent to videos like the Royal Institution's. And suddenly, underneath each of those videos, there are ill-thought-out, unscientific comments. And as a viewer, you can just scroll down a bit and go, there are my people. They're the ones that are right. Just like you might if the algorithm had determined that your fundamental beliefs were wrong. Which brings us back to the start. I'm pretty sure that the person running that homeopathic flu clinic genuinely thinks that they are doing good for the world. Their fundamental beliefs are at odds with reality. But that's never stopped people believing things. People may take what is just a saline injection and they may think that it's effective and they may spread flu, and that is in worst case lethal. And I'd argue that in a perfect world, those tech companies that facilitate that discussion have a moral imperative to reduce or remove messages like that. But it can't be that clear-cut because we aren't perfect. The people running them sure as hell aren't perfect. Now, ideally, the algorithms for Facebook or for any other YouTube, or for YouTube or for any other company, they would be able to think a little bit further ahead. They'd be able to increase long-term profits as their goal. At least that's what the corporations would like. They'd understand public relations and, they'd be able to work out what to do. And from humanity's perspective, the ideal algorithm would be, helping humanity to survive long-term. It would suppress conspiracy theories and fake news, but it would allow enough entertainment and nonsense that we still pay attention to it. In 1950, Isaac Asimov wrote a story called The Evitable Conflict. It became the last chapter of I, Robot. And it was about giant supercomputers that run the world's economies. They were called the machines. And in the story, they're not being perfectly efficient. They're not perfectly designed. They're making small errors here and there. And it turns out, spoilers, for a book in 1950, spoilers, they are programmed to protect humanity. And they know us better than we know ourselves. A little nudge here, a little nudge there, then humanity is less likely to destroy itself. And the people who believe that the machines are doing that are more likely to be seen as conspiracy theorists. We don't have machine learning systems like that. We don't have that sort of artificial intelligence. Not yet, anyway. And, we can't tell a computer program, here are the odds of humanity surviving into the next century and beyond, improve them. And if we ever do have a machine learning system like that, the sort of super intelligence that could, in theory, control broad strokes of humanity, then the world will be about to change so much that fake news will be the least of our worries. If anyone ever does figure that out, I can only hope that its goal is not maximize the profit of one company. But until someone does work out an algorithm that can do all that, it's up to us. And I know this is a really corny note to end up on, but we are that system. It's up to us to fact check things before we pass them on. It's up to us to create things that are honest, that don't smudge the truth. It's up to the few of us that create and train those algorithms to understand the biases and make sure we're not creating conspiracy rabbit holes. And it's up to those of us who create things to manage those commercial demands of clickbait and drama against honesty and truth and help the world not turn into a horrible pit. The only algorithm for truth that we have right now is ourselves. My name's Tom Scott. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, calm down. Thank you all very much for coming along for an exciting evening of mathematics. My name is Matt Parker. I used to be a maths teacher, which is why I know that person is on their phone while I'm talking, honestly. Unbelievable. Once a teacher, always a teacher. So can you all hear me adequately loud, amplified through the microphone? Excellent. People at the top, we're all happy? Marvelous. Right, so the plan for tonight, as Peter very kindly said in his introduction, and then went home. Oh, that's a big vote of confidence in tonight's talk. As he very kindly said, I do a wide range of things involving promoting mathematics or just generally trying to get more people more excited about maths. And I do things like YouTube videos, which is where I suspect the vast majority of the young people know me from. And I do BBC Radio 4, which is the rest of you. So I cover the whole spectrum. And so I recently wrote a book, Humble Pie. And I'd written one book previously called Things to Make and Do in the Fourth Dimension, which, as was mentioned in the introduction, is currently the second most viewed video on the RI channel, despite the fact that it's all abstract mathematics. And I figure tonight, with some applied mathematics, I'm taking number one. So I wrote the first book, and Penguin, the publishers, were like, would you like to write a second book? And the problem with Things to Make and Do in the Fourth Dimension is even though I was incredibly proud of it, and even though it sold very well for a maths book, it sold average for a book, right? Which is great, right? Average is, I'm above 50% of books. I'm very happy with that, right? But Penguin don't care what's in the book, right? They could publish, you know, another celebrity cookbook or anything. I mean, that's the one option, actually. And so I had to convince them it was a good decision to publish a book about mathematics. And so I suggested to them I could write a book all about my favorite mathematics mistakes, which is where Humble Pie, a comedy of maths errors, came about. And they liked that because people like tales of disaster, they like stories of things going wrong, they enjoy laughing at other people. I've made a career of being on the receiving end of that, and so they said, yes, write that book, that's great. People who aren't specifically maths nerds, which is their polite way of describing my target demographic, right? People will still enjoy reading these stories, and my ulterior motive was by showing examples of where maths goes wrong in everything from finance, engineering, you know, statistics, medicine, you name it. I can show, it's an excuse to talk about the maths that's required for these areas of our modern society, right? And so obviously maths works pretty flawlessly most of the time, so much so that most people have no idea how dependent we are on mathematics, and people often don't value maths for that reason. So I thought this is a great excuse to just talk about all the places maths is used, but by using things going wrong as my way in. And actually, because I used to be a maths teacher, actually, give me a cheer, any maths teachers in? Hiding at the top, not sounding exciting. It's the end of half term, isn't it? Right, okay, there you are. So I used to be a maths teacher, just like the fine people cowering at the top of the room. And I left teaching, but I still remembered how a lot of young people, because when you're at school, you're forced to do maths, right? When you're forced to do it, a lot of people perceive mathematics as a subject where you have to get it right. Getting the right answer is everything. It's the be-all, end-all of mathematics. And as a teacher, you know that that's not always strictly true, right? Maths is about trying something and getting it wrong, and then trying it again and hopefully getting it less wrong, and then more wrong, and hopefully it converges in on the minimal amount of wrong possible. But it's a long, slow process of not understanding it and not doing it well. And it's always very disappointing when students, or even people in standard issue humans, are afraid to try some maths because they think if they don't get the right answer, they haven't done it correctly. And that's not true. If you get the wrong answer, you may still be correct and you're trying it, right? Mathematics is about learning and teaching your brain how to think. And so I thought, okay, how can I kind of bring that approach to what will otherwise just be a random collection of math mistakes that haven't got any real meaning? And, I started with an inspirational poster that I had when I was a teacher. And the inspirational posters are the staple of the teaching world. It's what you decorate your classroom with. And this was one of my absolute favorites. There you go. Education works best when all the parts are working. Now, let me just break this down for you. So, you've got cogs representing students, teachers, and parents. And the trouble is, when that big cog on the right, which represents students, if that rotates, let's say, clockwise, because it meshes with teachers, teachers have to rotate anti-clockwise. That's all very nice. But neither of them are going anywhere because parents are jamming up the whole system. It's surprisingly more applaud from the teachers than the parents. Surprisingly accurate poster in my humble experience, right? And then obviously people just haven't thought through the geometry of this situation, right? If you have cogs, they have to go clockwise, anti-clockwise, clockwise, anti-clockwise. So when Manchester were unveiling their new approach to public transport, they went with the classic three-cog, making the city work together. Although people did point out and proceed to render in 3D, that's just this one point of view. Possibly from the side, it's fine. It's like, well played, well played. If all you see is this, right, you don't, look, that's deep. They were several steps ahead. Until I saw an article where President Trump in the United States was negotiating the North America Free Trade Agreement, and when that was put in the newspapers to show how all the working parts of North America should be moving in unison, papers use this illustration where you've already used your third dimension, right? You're not getting that back, so I paid money. I paid good money to license that image, to put it in my book, just so I could use the caption, "Making Cogs Great Again." So, totally worth it. And finally, £2 coins. When the £2 coin came out to celebrate the millennium, so there was a competition to design it. This was the winning entry, and it's got different concentric, circles, bits, where it shows different stages of UK history. And the middle one, your kind of mechanical age here, is a series of cogs. And because if a cog goes clockwise, the one next to it has to go anti-clockwise, then clockwise, anti-clockwise, you have to have an even number of cogs as you go around. The £2 coin has an odd number of cogs. It would not work. People on the internet were unimpressed. And smug in equal measure. And the Royal Mint put out a statement saying that it doesn't matter, right? It's just, what are you going on about? It's just meant to represent that age. And I was like, that's curious. But I wonder, because it's a 50-50, I don't know what would be a great example to simulate a 50-50 chance. Imagine flipping something, right? It could go either way. If you do it at random, you get an odd or an even number of cogs. And so I looked up the person who designed this coin, a guy called Bruce Russian. He's an art teacher in Norfolk, and on his website, he's got his original design, which would have worked. It's an even number of cogs. The actual coin that was made, these 3 cogs were removed, which meant that it wouldn't work. I was like, wow, he had it right and the Royal Mint broke it. But was that deliberate? So I sent him an email. I was like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm sure people have pointed this out. I'm just curious because I noticed you got it right. Was that deliberate? Did you think about it? Was it a concern? What happened? I'm writing a book about maths mistakes. I'm curious to know what was your thought process. And he replied to say that he didn't think, as an artist, it should have to be correct. He thought it's representative, a bunch of cogs. It doesn't make a difference to the artistic worth of the design. And to be honest, I kind of agree with him. He then said that he decided to make it work anyway because otherwise he would get loads of annoying emails from parents. I don't know why that bit was in bold, but there you go. So he just thought, people are going to complain. They're going to go on and on about it. And now this is the unfortunate edge, because when I was writing a book about maths mistakes, I didn't want it to be all about niche theoretical maths problems, of which there are things people thought they proved something and they hadn't. And that's interesting to a small demographic. That includes this guy. But then there's also the kind of pedantic, you're wrong, I'm right? Which is the opposite of it's fine to make mistakes, which is one of the things I want to get across. And a lot of mistakes don't really matter. So I hunted down a copy of this book. I remembered this from years and years and years ago. I forget where I didn't have it as a child. I must have seen a lot of my friends procreate, and I saw somewhere this book. This is a Sesame Street book. This is Ernie expressing his dislike of the possibility of being forced to live on the moon, which feels like a niche concern, but there you go. And I hunted down a copy of this book. I found it on the internet, and there's one thing about this which really bothers me. It's not important. It's not a major issue. Does anyone, apart from the child who had a very loud epiphany over there, like to tell, what's wrong with it? There's stars where the moon should be. You are 100% correct. What are these? There's not a hole in the moon. As far as I'm aware, in the extended Sesame Street universe, there are not Muppet bases that we can see twinkling on the moon, right? And so you often see a crescent moon, and then you'll see stars shining through it. And no, the moon is, well, from our point of view, a disk, right? And it's always there. It blocks out the stars. We do see different bits depending on how it's lit, and that's an artistic version of that. Bizarrely, I'm fine with that, right? But I'm like, they shouldn't show stars through the crescent moon, right? Come on, bit of astronomy, everybody. And then I was looking around for other examples. And actually, Sesame Street have done this more than once. And I was looking at, separately, the license plates from the state of Texas. So this is a plate from Texas. And as you can see, it's celebrating the fact that the shuttle was involved in Texas. And there's the shuttle. That's not a bad angle, actually, for the shuttle taking off. That's surprisingly. It hasn't got any of its boosters or anything. So maybe that's it landing. I don't know. I was distracted by, over here, that star. That star is dangerously close to that. But the only way I could know for sure would be to somehow buy some license plates from Texas. So I did that. And they arrived in the post. There we are. This is actually genuinely, I scanned it so I could get a high resolution version because all the ones online were too low res. And if you zoom right in, and you fill in the rest of the moon. Texas. Undone by a lone star. So people have since pointed out that maybe it's marking where the first Apollo landing site was, and it's very close. I might give them that, to be entirely honest. Right, but these problems, these two, they're not... Okay, if we're just talking about are there practical implications for the problems? In this case, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of getting maths correct and good maths PR and maths being important. But just practically, are they important? And sadly, in those cases, not really important. But sometimes the maths can be important. So you may have noticed, I am dancing around a very large Jenga tower. And I thought I'd have this set up during my show to artificially increase the amount of suspense for narrative purposes. No, so this is to show a fantastic effect about resonance. So this is a building, and we're going to show you in a second how a building resonates, hopefully to destruction. We will see how lucky we get, or unlucky, depending on what I'm trying to do at the time. Normally, you will hear resonance discussed when it comes to bridges. And so there are a lot of bridges which have had resonance problems dating back into, I think the earliest one I've come across was in the 1800s up near Manchester, where Salford is now. There was a bridge and there were some troops marching over the bridge because they were all in step. They hit a resonance frequency of the bridge, and the bridge started to move, which apparently they thought was kind of fun. So they started singing a tune to match the bouncing bridge, really got involved, and it collapsed. And no one died. No one died. It's okay. It's difficult writing, because you do when you cover engineering and medical mistakes. When I was putting the book together, I'm like, every second story, everybody dies. I can't have a comedy book about maths and every couple of pages, and then everybody died, right? So I think in all the engineering examples I'm going to give you, nobody died, I think. And all the aviation stories in the book, nobody died. Don't get me wrong, people do die in aviation problems, just not the ones I put in the book. So that was the problem with the bridge up near Manchester. In London, you've still got this one here. This is the Albert Bridge. All troops must break step when marching over this bridge. That sign is still there. They must break step. Interestingly, though, they must not break dance. Very different rule. And when I mention this, a lot of you are now thinking of one of two famous bridges, Tacoma Narrows Bridge. This was a bridge in the US, Art Deco bridge, absolutely phenomenal, incredible amount of twist. Now, that's not your standard resonance from just people marching on it or even bursts of wind, as you will occasionally read online. This is resonating, but this is flutter. This is aerodynamic flutter from the wind coming up the valley where it was. And the flutter basically caused this runaway feedback loop, whereas the bridge came up, more wind pushed it higher up. When it finally bounced back and down, more wind pushed it down. And you got this feedback, which led it to go more and more. Someone finally decided maybe they should leave their car. You've got the Millennium Bridge in London. This was opened in the year 2000, and it was only open for a couple of days before they had to close it. They looked at the footage. Now, if everyone's walking randomly, it should be fine, because they're not all going to match one particular frequency. But they looked at the footage, about 20% of the pedestrians, admittedly it's quite crowded, but 20% of them were all marching in sync. The bridge is moving about 7.5 centimeters either way, right, which is about 7.5 too many. And so they had to close it and do all sorts of crazy things to damp it, because what was happening was the bridge was moving a bit, and people were moving with it. And so they were then stepping in time with the bridge. So the bridge moving was causing the pedestrians to synchronize, and the pedestrians synchronizing was causing the bridge to move. And you get this feedback loop. The official wording was, it was synchronous lateral excitation. Right? If it was a feedback, energy was going in and it was matching a resonant frequency, which is, of course, totally terrifying. I'm more interested, though. I've become obsessed with bridges are one thing. They're easy to move. And for the most part now which is why the Millennium Bridge was so amazing. For the most part now, bridges work fine. Buildings, less so. So, there was a building in South Korea in 2011, which is disturbingly recent. Anything within a decade I find terrifying. It was a 39-story building. And one day, in 2011, the people on the 38th floor evacuated because they thought there was an earthquake or something. It was shaking like crazy. They left the building. No one else knew what they were going on about. The building was fine. Now, what? They did an investigation, and they recreated this. So this is genuinely true. It turns out, on the 12th floor, was an exercise class. And about 20 people decided to exercise to a different song that day. They exercised to Snap's I've Got the Power. If you're unfamiliar with Snap's I've Got the Power, that would be better if it was a dramatic... If you're unfamiliar with Snap's I've Got the Power, and that's as much as I can play without the Royal Institution getting a copyright strike on their channel. So they danced to that song. The song happened to match a resonant frequency of the building, and the 38th floor moved 10 times more than normal. Absolutely incredible. So when people design buildings, they have to try and factor this in, and it is a big problem, which is this is actually kind of a teaching aid for learning about resonance in building. And I've borrowed this off a friend of mine who is an engineer, and they've actually come along to give me a hand, because I am not qualified to run this, and see what it can show us about resonance. So can you please welcome to the stage, from the University of Bath, Paul Shepherd. There he is. Welcome. I haven't seen you since we put this back together. Okay, it's been minutes. So, don't pick that up yet, I get nervous. Okay, so first of all, what do you do at the University of Bath?
I teach mathematics to civil engineers. I research how we can use computers to design better buildings. And I've also got a role in our Institute of Mathematical Innovation, helping companies with their maths problems.
Fantastic. Note how he started and ended with maths to keep me happy. So, you use this in your lectures, I believe.
Yes.
And just talk us through, what is this bit of kit?
Literally, it's a washing machine motor, but let's not go there, right?
It really is. It's a washing machine motor in a box.
There's some magic in the box. It causes the base to move back and forth, to vibrate. And I have here a button that you're not qualified to press.
That's the one.
And a dial to make it go faster or slower.
Is there like a safe slow?
We can do it really.
Or do you want to leave it? What do you want to do?
No, it's
okay,
fine.
Here we go. Okay, so
I can do it slow.
we'll just show it in
See
action.
if it still works.
I'll catch it if it goes to full.
Really slow, yeah? Like, you know.
Oh, that is fantastically slow. If anyone starts watching the video right now, they're like, it is playing at the wrong speed.
Anyone's still awake.
So that's it, right? And on top of this, we built a Jenga tower.
Yeah.
And what we wanted to demonstrate with this is that if you hit the resonant frequency of the Jenga tower, it will fall over. But to make it a challenge, first we're going to start with a frequency where it won't fall over. So we think we've found one. We're unconvinced. We put it back together and went, now it's subtly different. And we'll have a slightly different resonant frequency. Well, let's give it a go. So should we slam straight into the...
Straight into the...
Oh, my goodness.
Right.
I'm going to catch it just in case we get unlucky.
Like, if you get unlucky, it goes that way.
Oh, yeah.
If I get unlucky, it goes that way. Here we go.
Here we go. It's fine. Look at it. I would happily live in that building. So we've got it moving at quite a frequency. It's shaking. Don't get me wrong. It's shaking it all over the place, but it's not falling over. What we're going to do now is we're going to keep the amplitude the same because we can't adjust it, and we're going to reduce the frequency so we're shaking it less. So do you want to reduce the frequency? We're slowly bringing the frequency down. So now you can stand back. There's now less shaking.
Sorry.
Wow, now I feel confident. Less shaking. And in theory, even though we're shaking it less, if we hit a resonant frequency, it will fall over. I think we're near one. Oh. Now, don't get me wrong, as we're shaking it slower, we're putting less energy into it. We were just putting the energy in at just the right time to build and accumulate in the system rather than cancelling out. And so you show this to what? Civil engineering students?
Yes. We don't want that to happen to buildings. And there's a certain number of things we can change to the building to make sure that the frequency at which it would do that is different from the frequencies that it would see in its daily life.
Okay.
So we kind of tune the building away from...
And you don't test it by putting models on this?
No.
You run like simulations or something?
We do maths on it, obviously.
Correct answer, Paul. And are there any buildings, like, can you give us examples of buildings you've done this on? Or are you like under a lot of non-disclosure agreements?
Not anymore.
Hey, you're an academic now.
Well, I was working on a bridge I won't say which one, at the same time as the wobbly bridge across the Thames had problems.
Oh, really?
So I was working for, let's say, a different company. And of course, we watched that and thought, well, we better make trebly sure that we're not going to fall for this.
You're like, whoops, glad it happened to them first.
So, it did take the world of engineering a little bit by surprise that it had happened so seriously. So, yeah, we can now understand. It was the person element that we knew the maths, but we didn't quite understand how people synchronize. They're the unpredictable ones.
And now, in the 2 decades since, when people design bridges, or any building, I guess, do you have to now factor in human movement as well?
Yeah. After that happened, a lot of people did a lot of experiments and research to work out how it happens and to quantify it. And now that sort of new research is taken into account when we design bridges today.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. Can we have a huge round of applause for Paul Shepherd? All right. I mean, he's literally just sat over there now. Okay, so, but his mic has been turned off. Okay, right. So I think this is great because the thing about engineering is we're often building things beyond our current full mathematical understanding, right? We use maths to build things which no longer make sense intuitively. Because if you look at something like the Millennium Bridge, you can't just go, that will wobble or that won't. Or indeed, most of the perfectly stable buildings, before we had computers and advanced maths, we built them out of massive bits of rocks where you can look at it and go, yep, that's not going anywhere, right? Whereas now we need computers and mathematics to check. And occasionally things go wrong. We will forget about a factor, or there's a new bit of mathematical behavior will emerge, and then the engineering industry learns, improves, and the maths is developed, and we carry on building more and more ridiculous things. Okay, so I'm going to leave these here and continue to carefully dance around them. What I thought I would do, because I've got one more guest at the end who's brought something else along to show you, but between now and then, I had so many stories, because I just had hundreds and hundreds of stories, of which a couple hundred made it into the book, and I couldn't decide which ones I was going to show you here today. So what I thought I would do is pick them at random. So I have here a spinning wheel, and so what we can do is, if we spin the wheel, right, it'll settle on one of the colors. This is not it. We'll do it again in a second. So we get a color, and up here, I've got a breakdown of what the colors mean. So we would do a story about programming, right? Boom, programming story. I get a programming story on the laptop. We do it. We have a great time. We do this a few times. Then we bring on the final guest. Very straightforward. So I'm going to get some volunteers to come down and... No, not yet. You haven't heard all the rules. I think I'm going to do this 3 times. That's my guess, 3 times. And so my plan is, if we have 3 different volunteers, we will start with a very young volunteer. We will then have more of a teenage high school volunteer, and then we'll have an adult volunteer. So if people watch this quickly, or it's edited down, it will look like the one volunteer aging rapidly throughout the talk. Okay, so are there any... Wait to the end of the sentence. Any young volunteers who would like to come down and be first? Over there, right at the back. Give me a wave. You get a round of applause. Come on down. Hi. Very nice to meet you. What's your name?
Maria.
Maria, nice to meet you. Would you like to come over here, Maria? So you can see I've got my spinner here. What I want you to do is to grab one of these and just give it a real spin, and we'll see which of any of the colors it ends up on. Off you go. Good spin. Whatever color it is, just say the category nice and loud. Oh, it's just in green. What's green?
Probability.
Thank you very much. Give her a round of applause. Give me a second to find my probability slides. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with a tale about probability and how humans are bad at probability. And this is one of my favorite examples where we can try to scam someone, right? We can try and trick someone into thinking it's a fair game when actually it's not. So for this, I need a volunteer. However, I'm going to take one from someone right up the top. Is there anyone, because you don't have to come down for this, you remain completely in situ. Let's go with the person over there, leaning on the rail at the back. Yep, give me a wave. Excellent. What's your name? Very loud? Yeah, we can't hear you. Okay, so what we're going to do, right, we're going to flip a coin down here. It's going to be heads or tails, right, and you're going to try and predict if it's heads or tails. Has anyone down here got a coin? Any of the adults got a coin they're prepared to flip for me? So are you happy to be our coin flipper? Okay, you can stay there. You flip the coin. Very straightforward. Okay, right. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip the coin. You're going to predict it. Would you like heads or tails? You feel like this is going to be a double-sided coin. I feel like we're having more of a conversation than I expected. Let's have a look. Give me the coin. Oh, my goodness. Okay, ready? Who would you like to verify the coin? Pick a human. The one next to you. Pick a human who's closer to me than you. It's okay, I've got a solution, don't worry. Would anyone like to... No, okay. Who? There? There. That one. Okay. Can you have a look at that? Is it a head on both sides? No. No. Is it tails on one side? Yeah. Excellent. Wow. That was anticlimactic. Here you are. You are now deemed trustworthy. By simply saying either the word heads or the word tails, or what do you think it's going to be? Tails. Okay, everyone in your own minds decide what you think it's going to be. Heads or tails in your own minds. Okay. Flip it and then call it out nice and loud so we can all hear it. Good flip. Solid flip. What is it? Tails. Who's right? Hands up if you're right. Okay, half of you, hands up if you're wrong. Okay, slightly more because, adorable kid. Okay. So, was that fair though? And by the way, it's not a trick coin. There's nothing fancy going on. It's not because there's more metal on one side than the other, right? Assuming that is a perfectly fair coin, everyone should be happy that was a perfectly fair challenge. In fact, if we were to bet money, which young people, you shouldn't, right? But were you to do such a thing, you would have a 50-50 chance of winning versus losing. And if you played it over and over again, you would win as often as you lose, or you play the same person, you would end up passing money back pretty much at random, right? No one has an advantage in that game. We could make the game slightly more exciting by having more than one flip. So if instead of asking you what one flip would be, I could say, we're going to flip it, we'll do two flips. So you can choose heads, heads, or heads, tails, or tails, heads, or tails, tails. Hey, what would you like, actually? What would you like? Tails, tails, right? And everyone here could think of their own one that they want to have. And if we flipped it, you've all got a 1 in 4 chance of being right. Or if we're playing two of us, if we don't get it straight away, we could keep flipping it until one of us has our run come up first. Still a fair coin. Must be still fair. What if we did 3? In fact, everyone, in your own minds, decide what 3 flips in a row? Heads, tails, heads, tails, 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 heads, tails, tails, right? What do you, in your own minds, decide what you think it's going to be? What did you decide up there? Tails, tails, you get one more. Heads, tails, tails, heads, right? In fact, here they all are. There's all the options. So you may have picked one of those, and they're all equally likely. I'm now going to bet all of you simultaneously that mine will come up before yours. So I want you to have a look at this, and I want you to choose which one is yours. Make sure you choose which one is yours. And then I'm going to add my predictions next to yours. So if you predicted heads, heads, tails, I predict tails, heads, heads, because I'm playing you all individually. If you pick tails, tails, heads, I've picked heads, tails, tails. I have different predictions. I mean, some of them are the same, but I mix up the predictions based on what you said. So everyone make sure you're happy which one is yours and my prediction next to it. Have you all got that? Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start flipping the coin until either you win or I win, and we'll keep going until every single game is finished. So, first one up. Flip the coin. What have you got? Heads. Second one. Oh. Third one. Tails. So, a lot of people are now happy they've just won. If you said heads, heads, tails, you have just beaten me. I said tails, heads, heads, which has not come up. But some people, yours isn't here yet. So tell you what, can you flip it again? Great, I love it. You're being more enthusiastic each time. Tails. So now, can you see the last 3 are now heads, tails, tails. So if you had heads, tails, tails, you've now won. If I had heads, tails, tails, I've now won. Or if I had heads, heads, tails against yours, I've now won. You need to keep track who wins first, you or me. So if either I beat you with heads, heads, tails, or I've beaten you with heads, tails, tails, just bear that in mind. Okay, give us another flip. Heads. So the next one up is tails, tails, heads. Tails, tails, heads. Up next. Tails, heads, tails. Tails, heads, tails. Tails, heads, tails. Okay. Heads, tails, tails. Heads, tails, tails. Is anyone still in the game? What are you thinking of? Which one's yours? Heads, heads, heads. And what did I predict against that? Tails, heads, heads. That doesn't come up. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, next one. Who's going to win? Heads. Tails, tails, heads. Tails, heads, tails. They're still both in the competition. Someone else has either won or gone out, right? Yep. Heads. Tails, heads. It's the beginning of your run. Here we go. Oh, but you're about to win. Oh. Is anyone still in the game? What were you on? Heads, tails, heads. I predicted heads, heads, tails, which was the first one out. So it's fine. Don't worry, we'll edit this out of the video. We're not going to edit it out of the video. So very quickly, before when it was heads or tails, roughly half the audience, roughly, got it correct. Put your hand up if I won the game against you. That's the vast majority of you. And hands up if you won. Oh, a few people. Okay, what the people who picked me, what did you go for? Heads, heads, tails, which was straight out of the gate, right? So 1 in 8 of you will win straight out of the gate. If you play this game over and over and the person you're playing against picks randomly, I will win 74% of the time. Roughly 3/4 of a time, the one I've put in white will beat the one in orange next to it. And the reason this works, and the reason it's not fair, is we don't flip the coin 3 times and then start again. If we did it 3 times, start again, 3 times, start again, it would be perfectly fair. Because they're overlapping, they're no longer independent probabilities. They're now dependent probabilities. And if you look at mine, all of mine will end in what your prediction starts with. I'm trying to make mine happen right before yours, which is why I got yours, because I knew if you've got heads, 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 unless the first 3 flips are heads, 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 I'm going to win, because tails, heads, heads will always come first. So let's say we've been flipping the coin for ages, and someone picked all tails, the opposite of you, and I picked heads, tails, tails. If the coin's been flip, 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 and you're like, here we go, at last, it's going to be tails, tails, tails. As soon as you get the first 2 in the run, I've already won. Unless the first 3 flips are tails, 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 or heads, 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 you cannot win. So there's a 1 in 8 chance you will win, and there's a 7 in 8 chance I will win. And the other ones are different variations on that theme with different probabilities, and if you average them all, you get the 74% figure. And people don't really think through when you get these unusual probabilities combining. I carry with me a set of dice, which I thought I'd get out if we have probability on the spinner wheel. These are called grime dice, and they have unusual numbers on them. And I appreciate you can't really see them, so I've got a shot up on the screen here. So the yellow one you can see there has got, it's got an 8, it's got some 3s. The green has got a 0. What's going on there, right? They've got crazy numbers on them. They're not 1 to 6. And the game you play is choose a dice. So you pick one color, I pick a different color. We roll them together. Highest number wins. Very straightforward, right? Except they're not all equally likely to win because they've got different numbers. But it's very hard to tell at a glance which is the best dice. I can now reveal to you that if you roll the red one versus the blue one, the red one will win more often than the blue. Not all the time, but more often. It's above 50%. The blue one wins more often than the green wins more often than the yellow wins more often than magenta, and so you get this fantastic ordering from the best dice, which is the red, down to the worst dice, which is the magenta. Or so you would think. If you play magenta versus red, the magenta wins more often than the red one. There's no best dice. If you remember this cycle and the person you're playing picks first, you can always pick a dice which has a higher probability of winning than they do. Same as the dice game, penny ante, right? As long as the other person picks first, you can always pick one that's better, which feels weird, but it's the same as rock, paper, scissors. It's like playing rock, paper, scissors, but you go first, and then I'll choose. There's no best option, but each one's better than another one, and each one loses to another one. Same deal on a higher scale. If you do play this, though, it gets a bit terrifying, because if people realize you're beating them, they will make you tell them the secret, and then you say, okay, I'll teach you the secret, and now we'll play 2 dice together. Why not? What they won't realize is if you play 2 dice simultaneously, it reverses the order. So you will pick first, and they will then deliberately pick the one that loses, Because you've got two. So that's the single dice game. That's the double dice game. If you're wondering what on earth is going on here, I've got a quick equation. There you go. Right? It's also got more than one cycle because there's another internal cycle of 5 in a different order. And if you double the dice, the internal cycle doesn't reverse. All it does is the top one becomes even. Right, so there's the double dice, there's the single dice, and so the outside one's flipping, but the inside one isn't. If you're wondering what's going on there, there's the new equation. All right, and I absolutely love them. If you want some details, the colors, I'm coming up with the colors. A friend of mine, a guy called James Grime, did the numbers. I did the colors. I'm helping. Because I said if they're these colors, then the length of the color goes up by 1 letter as you go around the outside cycle, which is why that's magenta, not purple. Purple has insufficient letters. And then James was like, well, if we make this one olive instead of green, the inner cycle is now alphabetical order. So you can now remember both cycles by looking at the colors. If you want all the stats, here are your advantages for any given pairing. The inner cycle is actually slightly stronger. The other one, here's all your numbers. Every single one is above 50%, apart from we couldn't quite get this one up to 50. It's just below. Because sadly, there's nothing magical about these dice. There's no incredible mass property. It's just that when you put numbers on some dice, it's very hard to tell if they form a non-transitive cycle or a transitive cycle. And non-transitive just means, like, numbers are transitive because if 7 is bigger than 3 and 3 is bigger than 1, then 7 is bigger than 1. It's a transitive property that passes down the chain. Just because, red beats blue and blue beats green doesn't mean red beats green, right? It's not a property that gets passed down the chain. And it's things like this which throw humans when we think we understand probability, but then it's just a little bit off. So, I think we've got time for another quick spin of the wheel. I need a teenager this time. Anyone prepared to come down and give me a hand? You look very keen right in the center. Would you like to come down and spin the wheel? You get the applause once you get to the aisle, not before. Nope. It gets awkward. Otherwise, we're just applauding other people awkwardly moving. It's not good. What was your name? Sasha. Very nice to meet you, Sasha. So you saw how this goes. You grab it, you give it a spin. Whatever color it ends up on, you say very loudly what it was. Okay, off you go. Okay, and we're going to be talking about, probability. Excellent. Round of applause for Sasha. Very much. Wow. What are the chances? Probability, I think I've got a second probability thing here. Give me a second. This is kind of fun. This is an old classic. So, way back in the distant past, 2010, I saw a newspaper story about someone who had analyzed the locations of the ancient monolithic sites in the UK. And they realized that they formed patterns. Specifically, if you took the 1,500 main monolithic ancient sites, these are prehistoric sites, and you analyzed their positions, they formed triangles. More than that, they form very precise triangles, isosceles triangles where two sides are exactly the same length, and they were within like 0.5%, incredible precision. And the person who found this put out a press release. It was in all the papers. They claimed it was some kind of ancient sat-nav, and that they used these geometric arrangements of monolithic sites to navigate across the United Kingdom. And the researchers said that the results were so precise they could not have happened by accident. In fact, they couldn't rule out extraterrestrial help. So, I thought I would check. So I went and also got some ancient sites and started plotting them on a map of the United Kingdom. And the first 3 I came across around Birmingham formed a perfect equilateral triangle within the required 0.5%. And then I forgot, I added in more triangles. You've also got two isosceles triangles on either side, both within the 0.5%. Another pair of isosceles triangles, both within the required 0.5%. The base and the perpendicular bisector go through 4 new locations. The location in Conway is within 12 meters of this line. It then goes over 170 miles across the United Kingdom, right through the base of the triangle, hits Luton, where it's within 9 meters of that spot. Incredibly precise patterns. And I was like, wow, this can't have happened by accident. Except I wasn't analyzing ancient monolithic sites. I had looked up the ancient Woolworth stores who had gone bankrupt slightly before. And we had already forgotten how the people of 2008 lived. I mean, how did they buy discount plastic goods and clothing? We just don't know. And for the young people who aren't familiar with Woolworths, they had a business model where they were like, let's just get all the confectionery and put it in open containers, let people help themselves, and assume nothing will go wrong with that business model. Right, so they went out of business. I found the 800 Woolworths locations around the UK, and I analyzed them, and I found the same patterns to the same level of precision as the other person who had found, who was claiming either ancient wisdom or, aliens or all these things, right? So I put out my findings as a press release about how we could learn about the ancient Woolworths civilization. The Guardian went with aliens found Woolworths civilization, which was pretty funny. It turns out there are just lots and lots of stores to choose from. So specifically, here are the ones I had with their postcodes. They're all legitimate stores. You can fact check this. But here are all the stores, right? If you've got, I checked the numbers. If you have 800 Woolworths stores, there are 85 million possible triangles. If you have 85 million triangles, it would be more amazing if none of them were isosceles, right? There are so many options. If you look hard enough, you will definitely find this pattern. Or any pattern if you're... Mathematically, we can state you can find any pattern you want to any level of precision you want if you're prepared to ignore enough data. The 1,500 stores the other person had used gave them 561 million triangles. Of course, in 561 million triangles, there are going to be a few that line up, right? We're just ignoring loads of data and cherry-picking the little bits which confirm whatever our bias may be. And every so often, this person would put out more findings, and I would put out other ridiculous press releases, up to and including a programmer friend of mine, a guy called Tom Scott, programmed a website based on the Woolworths thing, except he used monolithic sites and postcodes. So he found for every single postcode in the United Kingdom, there are 3 ley lines that go through it by joining up other monolithic sites, and one of them will be Stonehenge. Every single postcode. I can guarantee, you can now tell everyone, your house, your postcode is definitely at the center of 3 ley lines, one of which goes through Stonehenge, because it's true of everywhere on the United Kingdom. Just a lot of old things are lying around, right? And I get so annoyed when people go, this data confirms whatever my theory is, and they're not asking how much data didn't confirm it. You always want to know, if you're doing good, proper science, how much you're ignoring, what your method was, how you can falsify what you believe, and then honestly and rigorously checking that, and then getting other people to check it, right? Don't leave it to people like me to make fun of you in the newspaper. Okay, I think we've got time for let's do one quick last spin of the wheel, and then I'll bring on our final guest. So for this one, I need an adult who's prepared to come down. Is there anyone who's prepared to, you're practically here already. Give them a round of applause. Here they come. I'm Matt. What's your name? Matthew. That's easy to remember. Okay, so Matthew, we're going to spin the wheel. Whatever it lands on, we're going to talk about it. Off you go. Oh, is that just in probability? Yes! A round of applause for Matthew. No, it does land on other colours. Oh, well. Okay, so I'm very quickly going to talk about, 3. I didn't have a third probability. Oh, I have got one here. Let me get that. I'm going to show you my all-time, stay with me everyone, my all-time favorite photo. This is my absolute favorite photo, and this was taken in 1980. That is Donna. She was on a holiday or vacation. She's North American, going to one of the Disney World or lands, and when she was there, she got this photo taken with Smee. This is Smee, right? And the probability, the amazing thing about this is not that someone actually wanted a photograph with Smee, but what was happening in the background. Because many years later, she met her fiancé, Alex, right? They obviously got engaged. And one day she was showing Alex the photographs from her childhood, showed him this photograph, and he went, oh, that's odd. That looks like my dad. Wait. That's me. She was accidentally photographed with the person she would later go on to marry decades before they actually met, right? And that's amazing. Like, the media lost their minds. Like, imagine being in a photo as a kid and someone just wheels your future spouse into the background. It's incredible. But I was like, nah, it's not fate. It's not romance, it's statistics. Because how likely is, okay, this is unlikely to happen to any one given human. Because over the course of your life, particularly now there are cameras absolutely everywhere, you'll be photographed with, I don't know, 1,000 or so random people in backgrounds of photos. Who knows, right? Let's say about 1,000. And it's reasonably unlikely that you will go on to have a significant relationship with any of those random people. There's possibly billions of people that you could go on to have relationships with, right? And so 1,000 out of billions, I mean, obviously it depends how big how much mixing in the populations you're in, there are other factors, but it's very unlikely. Except it can happen to a lot of people, right? It couldn't just happen to you, it could happen to everyone. It could happen to those billions of people. I would argue the population size cancels out. There should be thousands of photographs like this out there, right? This is not amazing. We expect it to happen. We just don't expect it to happen to anyone specific. We wouldn't know who Donna and Alex are. They're just some random, North Americans. We'd have no idea, right? It's only because the photograph happened. It's a bit like winning the lottery. Right? It's amazing if you win the lottery. That's incredible. It's not amazing if someone wins the lottery. You don't see the newspaper, oh my goodness, someone won the lottery again. Just keeps happening. But yes, millions of people play the lottery, right? People forget about how many opportunities these things have. And I went on tour a couple of years ago. I did a show called Number Ninja. And when I was on tour, I showed this photograph and talked about how likely I thought it was. And sure enough, in one show, someone came up to me and said, oh, this happened to some friends of mine. A friend of mine, Kate, she met someone called Chris in Sheffield in 1993, and they got engaged. And they went on a world tour to celebrate their engagement. And as they were traveling around the planet, they went to visit some distant relatives of Kate's in outback Western Australia, which really is the middle of nowhere, right? I've been there, right? And they were visiting one particular family on one particular farm, and the wife in that family said, oh, it's so great you're here. My husband and I, we went to the UK once. Years ago, once, right? We took a whole bunch of photos, and we got one specific photo that we don't know where we took it. All the other ones, we've written the location on the back. This one, we have no idea. And they're like, oh, okay, well, let's have a look, right? And so they went in, they got the photo, they pulled it out, and Chris looked at it and went, oh, that looks like, oh, that's Trafalgar Square, right? You're feeding the pigeons in Trafalgar Square. Wait a minute, that's me! Right. Imagine traveling halfway around the world to be reminded of how much denim you wore as a kid. I mean, that's, wow. And it was like the one time as a kid his family went down to London, happened to be photographed by a distant relative of the person he would go on to marry, and then it was the one photograph that they wanted to show you when you happened to visit in this other. It's just insane, right? And again, they showed this at their wedding about how incredible it was that they had this photo. And that's true. It is incredible for them. It's just not incredible that it happens. You just got to remember how many opportunities things have to happen. In fact, you can kind of exploit that. So I've got this is an old school £1 coin, the old circular ones before they got rid of them. I'm going to flip it so it lands on its edge, right? So flip the coin, bam, land, edge. Okay, this would be okay, here we go. Ready? That's dangerously close. Oh! That's so close. Wouldn't that have been amazing? I mean, I thought I was just going to have to stand here doing the same thing over and over again, but no. Now, actually, that was the pound coin, I think, is the most likely thing to land on its edge. And just so you know, that doesn't always happen, by the way. There's not an edge. I happened to get lucky on the first flip, right? It genuinely does happen. I could sit here for, ooh, that was close. I could sit here and flip it thousands of times. Eventually, it would land on its edge, which I know because I did. So, this was me flipping a coin until it lands on its edge. I wanted to see how many edges I could get. And some of them I wasn't sure if they should count or not. So I want your opinion on this one. Okay, here we go. This is me flipping a coin so it lands on its edge. Flip the coin. Look at that. Wait. Oh, no. No. Ah. Does that count? Vote if you think that counts. Vote if you think it doesn't. You're right, it does not. I kept going. I flipped this specific coin 10,000 times. Oh, I haven't put the video out yet. So people watching this, spoiler, don't tell anyone else. That video will be out soon. I flipped it, because I did like funny videos like, here's a flip a coin so it lands on its edge. Boom, thanks, right? There's a video. And I kept going. 14 edges out of 10,000 flips. I believe the old circular pound coin is the most likely to land on its edge of all the coins. That's my theory, and it seems pretty likely. I couldn't believe I almost got an edge just... right. And so if you ever want to pass, in my experience, 3 days of your life, get involved. Okay, so I think we've done enough ridiculous bits of probability. We'll go back to the show as I originally planned. Oh, and to be honest, I am quite glad. Right? It's a great example of probability. If you do something often enough, weird things will happen. I like the fact that we got 3 probabilities in a row. I think that's actually quite a good message. Although the bizarre thing is, this is the first time I have ever done this talk, right? And it happened straight away. And for those of you watching the video, it's because we sat here and kept spinning it until we got probability every single time. This is the most patient audience I've had for some time. And this is a lesson in not believing things you see on the internet. So, good moral. Man, the second one took forever. Okay, so, that's not the actual moral of the story. Okay, I'm going to bring on my final guest and show you one more thing, and then I'll wrap up. And as was mentioned at the beginning, there are books available on the way out. I'm also doing a show at the Edinburgh Fringe coming up, and I'm doing a book tour afterwards, which is completely different to this. So if you watch this or you watch this online, I'm doing shows afterwards about humble pie, but I've deliberately made this a special show just for the Royal Institution. Because I'm not doing that again. And so if you do see me on tour, it'll be a totally different show, and it'll be great to see you at some of the shows. Right, so the very last thing I'm going to show is a problem, once again, with engineering. So we did structural, like civil engineering. We're now going to look at, well, an engineering that brought down a rocket. There was a rocket, the Ariane 5 rocket, which was being launched by ESA, and 40 seconds after it took off, it exploded. Thankfully, it was unstaffed, right? There were no humans on board. It was just payload of other spacecraft. But of course, someone had built those spacecraft, and they were obviously very attached to them, and a simple mathematical error caused the rocket to explode, and the spacecraft rained down on the swamp underneath. And I will explain what the math mistake was in a second, but the bits of spacecraft, they then sent them back to the people who had made them and were waiting to send them into space. And to show us the mangled bits of spacecraft from the Mullard Space Science Laboratory at UCL, please welcome Lucy Green. Do you want to go get them?
I'll get them.
I say welcome, she's going to arrive and then go away again and then come back. So I asked Lucy very kindly if she could go and find the bits of spacecraft. Do you want to very carefully, we'll wheel it out the front here. So these are, so what spacecraft was this?
So these are bits of instruments that we flew on the cluster spacecraft. So there's 4 of them actually. So 4 of them.
All on the same rocket?
All on the same rocket. Yeah, that was a big mistake.
And they posted them back to the lab?
Yes. So when the rocket obviously came down, as you said, not that long after launch, it fell into the swamp in French Guiana. And so the European Space Agency had people who could go out and rescue the rocket and get the pieces back. So we then got our instruments sent back, and apparently it was sort of, I wasn't there at the time, but the story goes that we got the box and they opened it up and there were still bits of swamp in it and bits of our instrument too. So this is one of the brains of one of the instruments on cluster. So we built the instrument that measures, well, we can talk about what the mission did, but it was sent up to study the environment around the Earth, so the magnetic field of the Earth and the particle environment. And this is the brains of the instrument that measured the electrons in the environment around the Earth.
And what research do you do?
So my research is really related. I study the sun, and I'm interested in how the sun's activity impacts the Earth's magnetic field, creating something called space weather. And this cluster mission was designed to study space weather. So one of the things it did was look at the physical processes behind the generation of the aurora, the northern lights. And the aurora are generated by solar activity.
That sounds useful. I mean, I say, what do you do like I don't know? I'm actually married to Lucy. Just so we're... Because otherwise, I thought it was quite convincing. If your parents are watching, they're like, he never asked. So we've got meteorite rings. Look at us, nerds. You go, that's fine, it's fine. I assume you're wearing it. Okay, so you're wearing the gloves, by the way, because why do you have to wear gloves handling this?
Well, because we think it's probably still covered in rocket fuel.
And that's not good for you.
It's not good for you. I don't want to get it on my hands and go and eat my dinner later. But I mean, it's pretty cool to see these bits that are completely mangled up. And normally our instruments don't come back. So these bits were built in our laboratories, and now we've got them back again. I think on one of them there was a little tag that said UCL's Mullard Space Science Laboratory. So someone's like, if found, please send it home to us.
They figured that would take, millions of years and be some distant civilization, but no, it was within a...
So
that's... And so when you arrived, you started working there just after this had happened?
Just after this had happened. So when we launched the spacecraft, of course, we want to have a big party. Everyone gets together to celebrate. And they'd bought champagne to drink after the launch. And I arrived about 2 years later, and that champagne was still there, sadly, undrunk. Yeah. But, I mean, we could talk about the success story because we did go on to rebuild these instruments. So
they were launched again?
They were launched again, yes. So the European Space Agency gave us the money to rebuild the instruments, and it took much less time. So within 4 years, they had been rebuilt and relaunched.
And they're still running?
And they're still running. So we launched in 2000, and what are we now? 2019. The ones that are in space now are still operating successfully.
Because this blew up in 96. So they really did turn it around quite quick. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so we were chatting to a friend of yours, and we didn't realize, literally last night, we were chatting to a friend, and she was like, oh, I was watching the live stream because my PhD was going to be on cluster. And so she was a first-year PhD student watching the live stream, and we were like, what happened? And she was like, the room was silent, and then everybody left. Wow. And she's like, well, different PhD, I guess. And so where do these live now?
So these live in my department, and we have some on display because, as I said, we built 4 instruments, so we've got quite a lot of this mangled hardware. And we keep them out. We talk to people about the mission, talk about what we did successfully to launch again. And I think it just serves as a reminder that it doesn't always work.
No. Okay, so we'll wheel these off before I actually touch them. So
They're
a big
broken
round
already.
They're broken. Okay. Round of applause for Professor Lucy Green. That's all right. People spend so long working on a spacecraft. Like a mission is decades to get it to work. And they have some of them out in the coffee room at the lab, right? Just like in a glass case. So a reminder for the next generation of space scientists that your decades of work may disappear in a fraction of a second and land in a swamp. And what happened with that was there was one sensor in the navigation part of the Ariane 5 rocket, so this part of the rocket took input from several sensors. It took the raw data coming in from those sensors, converted it into meaningful navigation information, and then sent that to the main processor that was kind of driving the rocket, if you will. And when the numbers were coming in, they had to work out how big they were going to be, because you have to allocate a certain amount of memory. And they tended to allocate just 16 bits, 16 ones and zeros for a value coming in. But some of them might be bigger. They could be up to 64. And so what they did, because they could have just written something in the program which was, for every input that comes in, check how big it is before you try and send it into the memory. But that's quite processor intensive, and they had quite strict limitations on how much power they were allowed to use. And so instead of checking every single sensor, they looked for all the sensors which could give a number bigger than 16 binary digits, and they would check those to avoid any problems. And the ones that never could be that big, they didn't bother checking, right? And they could save some processing. And that all worked really, really well on the Ariane 4. They then copied it into the Ariane 5 without double checking. And because of a different takeoff trajectory and because of the way the sensors worked, one of the sensors that previously wasn't being checked, well, continued to not be checked, but now should have been checked. And it actually didn't have to be on. They just left it on after launch. It was a pre-launch sensor, because if there was ever a go to launch and then they aborted before takeoff and then they reset, it took forever to reset. So they didn't turn them off straight away. They let them run for a while and then turn them off once they were sure it was definitely safe. However, it continued to run as it took off. It got a value that was too big. It didn't fit in the memory it put it in. It rolled over to the memory next to it, and the whole thing crashed. And which in and of itself wouldn't have been the worst thing, because it could have restarted or something, except it was designed to give a crash report. So like the stereotypical, someone's like, tell my spouse I love them, right? But this is like, tell my debugger the following crash context information, right? And so it sent the debug message up the same link to the main processor, which didn't know that could happen. It thought it was navigation data, thought the rocket had suddenly gone off to one side, tried to correct, except that it hadn't gone off to one side, and the correction threw it off to one side. It tore it apart, the self-destruct sequence kicked in, and because a 64-digit number was tried to put in a 16-digit space, right, this whole rocket exploded, and possibly because the spacecraft weren't insured, which is amazing. However, ESA did decide to refund it, right? So one slight mass error can have phenomenal implications. And that is pretty much it from me. I guess in conclusion, I started with the theory of, are mistakes important? And in some cases, yes. We have to get the maths right. I mean, we'll get it wrong occasionally, but we have to get it right in a lot of these critical situations. And that means we need people who are good at maths and are prepared to put the effort in. Because with maths, we can do more than our brains were originally built to do, right? We can go beyond our intuition, which I think is incredible. But ironically, to get mathematicians and people who are prepared to put the effort in and work hard, and more importantly, come up with systems that accept that humans will make mistakes, and we can use our same mathematical logic to have robust systems where mistakes don't become disasters. To have all of that, we need people who weren't afraid to make mistakes, to learn mathematics, right? So I guess the other goal of my book, as well as showing people all the incredible critical mathematics that underpins our modern society, I also wanted to encourage people to have a go. Maths is difficult, but the people who enjoy maths are not the people who find it easy, they're the people who enjoy how difficult it is. It's hard work, you get it wrong, but gradually it will teach your brain how to think, and gradually you will get better and better at mathematics. So I will be around physically here signing books if you want to get one afterwards. This video will end up on the internet. If you're watching it on the internet, you can order it from, that is not a mistake in the URL. It only works if you put the dot in the wrong spot, because I think I'm hilarious. Actually, Penguin were like, but it doesn't work if you put the, and umble-pi.com doesn't work. And I'm like, yeah, people have to earn the book. And they're like, we don't think you've understood marketing, Matt. So I will also be around signing books and calculators. At this point, though, I am done. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for making that work.
I make comedy shows about science with Helen Onney and Matt Parker as Festival of the Spoken Nerd. Our most recent show is out now on DVD. The others like to do their music and maths things, but I like to stick to actual science.
Oh, wow. Calm down, calm down. That is the most efficient calming down I have seen in some time. Thank you. It's a very well-behaved audience. That's fantastic. Thank you all very much for coming along in such a polite, orderly fashion. Thank you very much, Deborah, who has vanished, for introducing me so nicely. As she said, my name is Matt Parker. I am here to talk to you about things to see and hear in the fourth dimension. Before we go racing into that, a little bit about myself. So, actually, most of my information is up there. You can see my name is Matt Parker. I work at Queen Mary, University of London. I used to be a maths teacher. Actually, have we got any maths teachers in? All sat down the front. Brilliant. Okay. No surprises there. So I used to be, like, if you've been brought along by a maths teacher, like one of your fine, standard, normal maths teachers, and no maths teachers are truly normal, are they? Well, I used to be a regular maths teacher, and then I've gradually drifted into a much more varied career. So at the university at Queen Mary, which is a university in East London, I work in the maths department. I am the Public Engagement in Mathematics Fellow. You're laughing at my career. Thanks for that. That's don't patronise me. We'll get racing into this, and it is going to be a night of my favourite bits of mathematics. I'm going to show you my all-time favourite shape. It is pretty spectacular, and I'm going to hopefully show you some other practical bits of mathematics along the way. But we will start properly by doing some mathematics. So can everyone who brought their calculator, could you take that out now? Really? That is the most movement I have ever seen on everyone take out your... genuinely, has anyone got... Okay, I'm seeing a lot of phones. Has anyone got an actual calculator? Oh, that's so good. It's a Casio, very nice. Can anyone beat a Casio? Another Casio? They're both from the FX series, it looks like, from here. They're standard school issue ones. Another Casio, very nice. No one's brought like a hilarious slide ruler or something. That has happened. What have you got? Oh, is that Texas Instruments? Fantastic. All right. This is just my game of guess the calculator. Okay, so whatever your calculation device is, don't feel intimidated now if you've just got your phone. I want you to type into it any two-digit number that takes your fancy. If people have been to the Christmas lecture filming, this is one of the things I do when I've got a lot of time to fill. So some of you may have seen me do this trick before, but it's one of my absolute favorite maths tricks. So what I want you to do, without talking, is to type in your two-digit number, then hit multiply, type in the same two-digit number again, hit multiply, type in the same two-digit number a third time, and then hit equals. And what you have done is you've calculated the cube of your original two-digit number. So those two digits times the same two digits times the same two digits again. And what you've done is the kind of long, tedious part of mathematics, the multiplying things over and over. Right? This is why we have calculators. Right? The fun bit of maths, though, is what you can do with the answer. Is there anyone who has an answer on their screen? They've cubed their two-digit number and they're prepared to share it. Is there anyone who's happy to share? Okay, I'm going to go with a very keen girl there. Yes, the one now looking nervous, pointing at herself. Yes, could you read out up there? Is someone trying to steal your calculator? You're like, wait, this is too much pressure. Give me that. All right, okay, I think she can do it. Okay, can you read out what answer have you got there? 17,576. Okay, so you had to very carefully cube 26 to get that. Calm down, calm down. Who shouted, I did it? Did someone else do 26? No. But you did something else. That's excellent. Thanks for joining in. So, actually, what answer have you got on the screen down there? Now that we have started what I believe is a conversation.
6,084.
Okay, 6,084. Did you put in 14 and cube that? No. No. Excellent. I regret starting this conversation. So, I tell you, I will come back to you. In fact, I suspect you're going to feature heavily tonight. I will come back to you in a moment, so just wait there, right? So what I'm actually doing, by the way, is not a difficult calculation. I'm not doing a long, tedious cube root in my head. I'm doing a bit of a trick. And so I would do I would do 3 in quick succession, and then if I get all 3 correct, you go the correct amount of wild. So is there one person over here who's prepared to, okay, I'm going to go guy behind the sparkly hat over there. In fact, if this works, you can have the sparkly hat as a prize. Okay, and it's disappeared, there you are. It's, you wouldn't believe they convert straight to gas at room temperature. Okay, so we got you in a second, remain calm. Okay, one over here, okay, Miss Reluctant Lady right in the middle, and then you don't get a hat, I'm afraid. You know what? Forage nearby. And then keen person over here. Who's taking your glasses off in shock? Me? Yes, right, okay, so we're going to do them in reverse order. So you're going to, in a second, you're going to call your answer out, so many thousands, and then the rest, and then we'll come, where have you gone? Over here, and then you're looking more nervous by the minute, it's fine. And then we come over here to you, sir, right? And if I get all 3 correct, wild. Okay, right. What have you got on the screen over here?
4,167.
You put in 23. 52. Okay, nodding silently is perfectly acceptable. Yes, and over here? You've put in 49. So what was the number again? 704,000. I suspect that at a guess it's going to be 89. I don't entirely feel like I earned that. So, right, now what I'm doing is, like I said, it's just a crude, I've got 2 rules. One rule that tells me the first digit of the original number, and a second rule that tells me the second digit of the original number. And I'm not doing anything other than just bluntly applying those 2 rules. So as you read it out, I'm listening to the digits and applying those two patterns to work out what they are. So if you cube something that's not a 2-digit number, then I won't know. I will just take whatever the answer is and put it through the same algorithm. And if I mishear it, I thought you said 104,000, and I wasn't smart enough to know that's not the cube of a 2-digit number, so I still applied the same 2 rules. Now, the 2 rules, by the way, are incredibly easy, and if you knew what they are, you would not be impressed at all, which is why I'm not going to explain them. But if you want to learn them, when you get home tonight, right, get a calculator, get some paper, get a pen, maybe invite some friends over, right? Have a maths party, right? And if you can serve triangle-shaped snacks. If you cube a lot of 2-digit numbers, you will very quickly see the patterns come out, right? So start cubing 2-digit numbers, look for the patterns, and sooner or later you can learn what this is. But to do something slightly more difficult, and this is right now, this is the warm-up over, to do something slightly more difficult, I have brought with me, and you can put your calculators away, I've brought with me one of my favorite maths toys. I have it here. It is the Rubik's Cube. I'm going to attempt to solve this for you live on stage. Before I do that, because people will accuse me of prearranging it, I'm going to give it to you. Would you mind taking that and mixing it up, right? So mix that up so it's in a random arrangement. I'm going to attempt to solve for you the Rubik's Cube. Oh, has anyone got a timer? Could one person get their timing device back up? Who have I not interacted with yet? Yes, miss. Okay, would you mind when I start? If you're solving that, you're in so much trouble. Mix it up, right? And so I better get all the stickers back, right? And so, miss, when I start solving it, you start timing. When it's solved, thank goodness, give me that, give me that. Thank you very much. Okay, so when I start solving, are you just texting a friend? You wouldn't believe what's in the show. Right, so you start. Have you opened a time? You're putting your phone away now.
It didn't have a timer.
hasn't got a timer. Right, so you said, no problem, I'll time you, I'll get my... You didn't even pretend. You could have just counted the seconds. Okay, so you've now stolen a phone. Okay, does this one have a timer? Okay, to be fair, this show's involving a lot more admin than I expected. Could you, when I start solving it, start the timer? Right, at the end, once I've got it, once it's finished, when I finish it, no one react, right? At the very end, could you call the timeout? If you deem that suitably impressive, you can start applauding. Okay, right, here we go. So, and the time starts... Did you start? Good, right. Only if I say now you start, but not that. You get... The time starts now. Okay, right, so people might think that a Rubik's Cube is famously very difficult to solve. So how on earth can I solve it in a timely fashion? And to be honest, if I don't get this done in the first 20 to 30 minutes, we'll just pack up and go home. And then we just call the show off at that point. In fact, you can learn how to solve the Rubik's Cube. You can learn what combinations of twists move different bits of it around. And the current world record for solving a Rubik's Cube is 23.19 seconds. How long have I been going for? 30, right. Oh, several people are timing me. Why am I not surprised? So anyway, I've been going for over half a minute, so a more impressive me would be done by now. But if there are any Rubik's Cube experts in, and believe me, it is very likely, you will know that 23.19 seconds is actually not the current world record for solving a Rubik's Cube. That is the current world record for solving a Rubik's Cube while you're blindfolded. So, yeah, think that through, right? Someone was given a Rubik's Cube and proceeded to solve it in under half a minute. In fact, there are all sorts of ridiculous world records for solving Rubik's Cubes. There's a world record for solving the Rubik's Cube while underwater, 19.01 seconds. There's a world record for solving a Rubik's Cube solely with your feet, which is currently 23.14 seconds. And I have solved it in... 1 minute 18.95. I'll take it. All right, so what I absolutely love about the Rubik's Cube, and the reason I could solve it is actually, I can bring it up on the screen here, so if you can't, there we go. Right, oh, that's a lot less flattering than I was hoping for. Okay, so the Rubik's Cube, what I love about it is that it's a perfect example of a 3D cube, because it spins in 3 different directions. It spins that way, it spins that way, and it spins that way. And when you're solving the Rubik's Cube, the middle bits, those middle squares, never move. They remain perfectly still. They are effectively the kind of 3D axis of the Rubik's Cube. There we go. And pause. Perfect, right. So as I move it around, all I'm doing is, with reference to those points that never budge, I've learnt what twists in the 3 different directions move all the different stickers, or well, different pieces actually, into the correct positions. And with a bit of practice, turns out all the instructions are on YouTube, with a bit of practice you can learn to do it reasonably quickly. For proper nerd cred though, under 30 seconds. And my best time is, I can just break a minute. I'm not brilliant. But I attempt to solve it while socializing. So that's my attempt at a record. If people want to have a play with the Rubik's Cube afterwards, please do come down and have a look at it. And the fact that it is a 3D cube, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And my idea behind the talk today is eventually, via some practical maths, I'm going to work my way up to showing you the 4th dimension. In fact, my all-time favorite shape only works in 4 dimensions. So just like this is our 3D cube, I'm going to try and work our way up to shapes that exist in more dimensions than we have. But it's fine. We're not going to go racing straight into it. We're going to gradually warm up, and we're going to finish with a 4D version of the cube. So before that, I have promised some practical mathematics, so I thought we'd just get that out of the way now. I'm going to show you the mathematical way to tie your shoelaces. And this, I mean, you can save an incredible amount of time if you tie your shoes the maths way. So if I bring this camera around, because I'm well aware you can't all see my shoes, right? But if I set a camera up down here, actually, if I put it over here, right, so in theory, if I get that there. Okay, right, so if I put my foot in front of that, can you all... Oh, and you can see the one behind. Oh, wait. Okay, there you go. It's like the world's nerdiest chorus line. Look at that. Right, okay, anyway, so you can see my... This show's going in a lot of unexpected directions. Okay, so you can see my shoelace here. In fact, if I angle that down a second, it'll be a little bit less. There we are. Okay, right, so I'm going to tie my shoe the mathematical way. And the way this works is, you start with the two laces with like a foundation knot, and you just hold them. And most people do some kind of ridiculous moving the laces around, whatnot, right? In reality, what you can do is, once you've done the foundation knot, if you just cross the two laces over, they'll tie themselves. And that's the correct amount of amazed. Would you like to learn? Yes. All right, so I'll do it again. I'm going to give you a few seconds. If you've got shoes with laces, choose your favorite shoe, undo the laces. If you haven't got laces, odds are the person next to you does, and they're not using at least one shoe, right? So everyone gets some laces within reach. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? Okay, so undo the laces, but do that foundation knot, like what you can see I've got tied on my shoe so far. Then, if you have a close look at the foundation knot, one lace is going backwards and one's going forwards. So take the one that goes backwards, curl it up and over so it's going forward, and hold it on the way down like that. And then take the one that's already going forward and curl it backwards and hold it on the way down over there. Now all you have to do is take the two bits you're holding, put them under the other loop, swap hands, pull tight, and you've got a knot. Okay, is there a delay on that? Oh, sorry. Okay, right. So I'll tell you what, I'll do it again. Because there's a delay. If you miss it, just very quickly look slightly to the left, all right, and you'll see it again. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to do it one last time. Then I'm going to give you, I'll do it again with instructions on the screen. And then I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to have a go, and then we'll carry on with the talk. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to untie my laces here. We have picture-in-picture instructions. So you start with the back one curling forward, hold it on the way down. The front one curling back, hold it on the way down. And then you cross them both under the other loop, swap hands, pull tight, and it's done. The great thing about doing that, not only will you save seconds of your life every day, but the knot you end up with is mathematically the same as the standard knot you get doing it the really long way. And so you're not sacrificing knot quality, but you are doing it an awful lot quicker. And I can say that it is mathematically the same because there's an area of maths called knot theory. There are mathematicians called knot theorists, which is the best name ever, and but they are theorists, they just look at knots. And so there may be a few puns in this section. And so knot theorists study knots, and sadly at the moment, humankind's understanding of knots is terrible. Humans we are not good at knots whatsoever. And knot theorists do not have a reliable way to work out how to undo a knot. And so, for example, if I show you this knot up on the screen here, in fact, this is a picture from my book, that knot, and the convention when you draw a knot is if the string goes underneath, then you just leave a little gap, right? So where it goes underneath, it disappears briefly and comes out the other side. So they're not just little bits of string, they go underneath each other and the rest. We have no idea what the best way is to undo that knot. No idea. And the way that we like to undo knots is you can choose one bit where the string goes underneath, and you can cut it from underneath, bring it on top, and join it together. We call that a crossing switch, because you take one bit which crosses underneath and you switch it to cross on top. And at the moment, the world record for undoing this knot is 3 crossing switches. So if you swap it in 3 places, it will come completely undone, and you'll get a loop of string with no tangles in it whatsoever. No one has ever found a way to undo this with 2 crossing switches. No one has ever managed to prove you can't undo this knot with 2 crossing switches. It is an unknown open bit of mathematics. It is called the 1011 knot. I put it in my book because what I want people to do is to make it out of string and then have a go. And it won't be in this arrangement because people have tried all the crossing switches in this arrangement, but if you make it in that arrangement and then you pick it up and move it around so different bits cross each other, and then you make 2 crossing switches and take a photo of you pointing at them, because if it works and you can't recreate it, no deal, right? But if it does work, if you take a photo of you pointing at 2 bits, you then make crossing switches at those 2 points and it becomes undone, and you then send me an email, right? Mathematical fame and fortune are yours. For a very narrow definition of fame and fortune. And there are other ones. This is just the easiest one I can come across. Oh, I've had 1 email so far. The book came out in October. Someone sent me an email and said, I did the knot. I'm like, oh my goodness, right? So I invited a friend around, right? We actually had a little knot party. We got some string, and it turns out they had, the knot they started with wasn't quite the 1011. It was a different knot. So we spent all evening, eventually worked it out. I've left myself very open to string-based trolling, it has now occurred to me. So please, only if you think you've got, oh goodness, send me an email and I will check. And hopefully sooner or later someone will do it. And mathematicians are working on having a much more systematic way of going about this. Instead of just having a go, trying to work out a way that given any knot, you can calculate what crossing switches will undo it. And at the moment, bacteria are better at undoing knots than humans are. And that's not good, because when bacteria reproduce, they unzip their DNA and their DNA gets very tangled. And what they do is they have little enzymes that go around and perform crossing switches. They will snip the DNA on one side, move it around another strand and join it back together again. And those enzymes in bacteria are more efficient at undoing knots in DNA than anything humans can do. And at the moment, biologists are working with mathematicians to try and work out, first of all, what the bacteria are doing, and secondly, how we can stop them from doing it. Because if we know what they're up to, we can somehow impede their ability to untangle themselves. And there's a whole future wave of medical, ways that we can combat bacteria if we had a better mathematical understanding of knots. I think that's absolutely amazing. It's a fantastic ongoing area of maths research. But up next is a slightly more fun maths you can try at home. So if you get sick of playing with string, I'm going to show you a fantastic activity you can do. I brought some other things for show and tell. Before I go to knots, right, are great, but there's a related area of links. And links are when you have more than one loop that go through each other. And there's a famous set of links called the Bromian rings. And they're pictured on this beer can. This is a beer can from the 1950s. I spent ages stalking it on eBay. I eventually managed to buy one. It's the one in the picture here. You can come and have a look at it if you want to afterwards. And the reason I really wanted it is the logo is a mathematical set of rings. They're called Bromian rings. And the way they work, the way those 3 links go through each other, if you break any one of those 3 loops, the other 2 will come apart as well. So it only holds together as long as all 3 are intact. You break any one, the rest separate. And so here you can see they've put purity, body, and flavor, because if you remove any one of those from your beer, the beverage just falls apart. And I thought that's an amazing mathematical logo. And you can do it for more links. You can link 4 links, such that if you cut any one, the other 3 come apart, and it works for any number. For any n links, you can arrange them in such a way that if you cut one, the other n minus 1 come apart as well. And I'd heard rumors about this can. I finally managed to buy one. I was so pleased. Recently, I was in New York doing some maths talks. And I went for a bit of a walk before one of my talks I was doing. And I walked past a billboard for the same beer, Valentine's beer. They still make this beer. And I took a photo of me with it. I was so excited. I had no idea this beer still existed. And so you see how happy I am. But then, suddenly, my excitement turned to distress, because they have changed the logo. they've taken the crossing markings off the logo, right? And so I did the talk, and in the talk I said, right, we have to get a bottle of this beer. Afterwards, we walked around several bars in New York demanding, do you have this beer? Eventually we found one that does. I smuggled the bottle back into the country, there you are. And so if you want to, I didn't declare it to customs, because I have to put, what have you brought in? An empty beer bottle. Full of disappointment. And so if you look, of course I brought the old can with me to the bar, so you can compare and contrast the two. I took a photo the next day in better light, right? So they've taken all the markings. People have tried to say it's okay, Matt. They've just turned it into a Venn diagram. I'm not buying that, right? They have ruined all the maths of that link, so I am very upset. But if you'd like to come down afterwards, you can have a look at the original and then the changed mathematical logo of the beer. Right, so onto a activity you can try yourself at home. I'm going to show you now my all-time second favorite shapes. This is not the number one favorite shape, we'll work our way up to that, but my all-time second favorite shape. And to make this, this is not my second favorite shape, by the way. This is a rectangle. I mean, don't get me wrong, big fan, but right, we can do better than just a straight up rectangle. What you can do is if you get a rectangle that is sufficiently skinny and you join the two ends together, you get a loop. The technical maths name for this is a boring shape. You can make it an exciting shape by taking the two ends apart, turning one of them over, so when you stick them together, you get a loop with a twist in it. Now, many of you, because I know the sort of people who come along to these things, will have seen one of these before. It was invented by a guy called Mr. Mobius in the late 1800s, and he was so excited when he made what we now know as the Mobius loop that he proceeded to name himself after the shape. And not everything tonight is a fact, I should make that very clear. So the great thing about the Mobius loop, it's got all sorts of unusual properties. So some of you will have heard that it's only got one side, it's also only got one edge, which is amazing, and does all sorts of strange things. But the best thing you can do with a Mobius loop is an activity when you've got two of them that are exactly the same length. And to get two the same length, you can see I've used paper that's reasonably wide. If I make a single snip in the center there, and because I originally taped it all together at once, I cut through the tape, I'm going to get two loops precisely the same length. Okay, so I get back to where I started, and so now I've cut that in half. What? I've just blown your minds, right? So the Mobius loop can't be cut in half. I genuinely cut it in half, like I properly cut right down the center. There's no funny business there. If you cut a Mobius loop in half, you end up with one piece, a single loop, and that just freaks me out. But it gets worse. If you take a longer rectangle to start with, this time, when you start with your zero twist cylinder, instead of doing one twist, if you do one, then two, then three, you get what's called a three-twist Mobius loop. And if it seems at all familiar, it's because it is the recycling logo. There you are. So then, the next time you're walking down the street and you see the recycling logo, you can go, hey, that is a three-twist Mobius loop. Well, that only works if there's someone next to you. I should look insane otherwise. Anyway, right, so a three-twist Mobius loop, I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm going to try and cut it right down the center in your own minds without calling it out. I want you to see if you can guess, once I cut right down the middle of a three-twist Mobius loop, how many pieces of paper will I end up with? Will it still be one loop? Will I get two, or will I get three? In your own minds, decide. Okay, and it turns out I get that. Give it a second. Here we go. Right. Is it one? Is it two? Is it three? Is it two? It turns out it's one. It's a single loop, but now there is a knot tied in it. Right? So I started with a loop of paper with no knots. I cut it down the center, and it tangled itself. At no point did I undo the loop. So somehow a knot got in there. And that, oh, for any knot fans in, that's a trefoil. And so if I, some of you will be here. I can't get rid of it. It's like a trivial knot. It's properly in there. In fact, it takes one crossing switch to get rid of it. And actually that is how the knots get in DNA, because DNA is a very, very twisted, very long strand. When it reproduces, it unzips down the middle, just like I did. You cut it right down the middle, and by cutting a twisted loop in half, it ties itself in knots. And some bacteria, and apparently some human cells, not a biologist, have circular DNA. And so you end up with very, very knotted. Even if the two ends aren't joined together, by cutting a tangled thing in half, it gets incredibly knotted. And so that's where the knots come from when DNA reproduces, and you have to do crossing switches to get rid of them. But the fact that by cutting a loop, you get a knot really messes with my head. But it gets worse. I skipped right over our friend, the zero twist, because this is quite a boring shape. If I was to cut this in half for you right down the center, I'd just get 2 zero twists. Not that exciting. I'm going to make one slight change. I've got another cylinder here. I'm going to stick both of them together at right angles. I'm then going to cut them both in half while they're stuck together. Oh, and if any of you are going to try this at home afterwards, and a lot of you are, right? Make sure you put plenty of tape on both sides, because if you don't tape it together sufficiently well, it will come undone while you're cutting through them. Okay, there we go. Right, so again, in your own minds, without calling it out, without ruining it for anyone else, see if you can guess how many pieces of paper I'm going to get. And if you think you've got a good guess of that, have a guess what shape or shapes those pieces of paper will be. Right, here we go, right through the first one. We get that. All right, through the second one. And I end up with a square. Yeah. Yes. So good. So good. I don't know if you've noticed, right, but obviously there's most of the audience, you're down here, and you are all my favourites. Anyone arriving late or other people who now look shocked are sat up the very, very top over here. And occasionally people have been popping in, particularly people who work at the RI, because they're like, what is this maths comedy thing all about? So they've been coming in. It didn't happen. I was really hoping someone would come in right then, right, because all they would see is me going, hey guys, a square! And you're like, a square? Oh my God, a round of applause for the... Wait till you guys see a triangle. My goodness, right, some advanced maths to know. Anyway, right, I think that is amazing that 2 loops both cut in half give you a square. In fact, you can reverse that to see why. If I put these 2 ends back together like that, if I identify those 2 edges, I get a strip of paper with a loop at each end. And if I then put those 2 loops back together so that they line up, that's my original 2 cylinders at right angles to each other. You cut that one in half and you get that. You cut that one in half and you get a square. But it gets worse. 2 Mobius loops stuck together at right angles. I'm going to cut. This is the last one. There are no more down there. Right? I'm going to cut, without talking, both of these in half at the same time. And then I want you to try and guess in your own minds, without calling it out, how many pieces of paper and what shape or shapes do you think they will be? Right, I've cut all the way through the first one, and I've got that. Right, okay, here we go. It will take me a second to untangle these when I'm done, by the way. I'm cutting through the second one, and I end up with there's 2 hearts that go through each other. Oh, that don't... No. Too late. Right? So I held these up and you're like, nah. And then there was just silence. And then one person went, wait a minute. We applauded the square. If we don't applaud this, we're officially dead inside, right? It's too late, though. So that is absolutely brilliant, right? And so, you now know what I gave my girlfriend for Valentine's Day last year. 2 Mobius loops and a pair of scissors. And instructions, right? And so, and we got married last July. So, boom, it works. That's the most expensive maths proof I've ever done. And so, the wedding ring is iron nickel meteorite, right? It's so very different talk. See me afterwards. What a substance. Anyway, right? So that is absolutely brilliant. If you want to make one of these, then there's a secret to bear in mind. When you make a Mobius loop, you're actually faced with a choice. You can either twist it to the right or you can twist it to the left, and you get a right-handed or a left-handed Mobius loop. They're mirror images of each other. They're different shapes. For the hearts to work, you've got to have a right-handed attached to a left-handed. Right? If you attach them both and they're both the same twist, then you don't get 2 hearts. You get like a boat. And a thing, I don't know, right? They're not even joined together. It is a world of disappointment. And so, right? Teachers. I've just planned your next lesson back, right? So, right, this is so good, particularly with 6th formers, right? Because if you do this with 6th formers, you do the whole lesson like, send me an email, I'll send you the worksheets, right? And as you go along, at the beginning of the lesson, you say, all right, class, make sure you pay very close attention and follow all the instructions very carefully. And they're all like, please. Follow instructions, right? And then you don't tell them about the twist, right? And the third of them by accident will do it right and get the 2 hearts, and the rest will get the boat and the thing, right? And then you walk around going, I told you to pay attention. It's so good, right? And then they'll do it again, and they'll do exactly what their friend's doing, and it'll work for them and it won't work for us. Then their head will explode. I still miss teaching sometimes. It's absolutely great fun, but I want to get to my favorite shape, which is in the 4th dimension. So I'm now going to show you what the 4th dimension looks like. And again, we're going to come running at this. And a lot of people are vaguely familiar with dimensions from an area of maths you might not expect. So when you're at school, you will have been forced to draw charts. You will have been forced to plot things on graphs. And when you were doing that, you were actually working with dimensions. And so in 2 dimensions, you've only got 2 directions you can move in. You've got up and down, and you've got left and right. And that's an XY axis graph where you plot things onto it. And in fact, if you can start plotting a variety of coordinates. And I've put on here all the combinations of 0 and 1 on that thing there. And you do this quite a bit. You do it in maths because it's fun. You do it in science because if you've done an experiment and there's 2 different things you're measuring, then you can plot 2 bits of data simultaneously as data points on an XY coordinate. In fact, more people should use 2-dimensional plots than they do. Most people stick to 1-dimensional plots, which I think is ridiculous. So for example, the Football Premier League, have a league table with only 1 dimension, right? It's just straight up and down, right? You could, if you wanted, plot all Premiership teams in 2 dimensions and you get a 2D league table. It would look a little bit like this, right? And so what you've done, I've plotted net wins. That's the number of wins, subtract the number of losses. None of this 2 points ridiculousness, right? And then on this one here, I've plotted the goals. Number of goals scored, subtract number of goals conceded. As you can see, some teams have scored a negative number of goals, right? And so now, at the end of the season, you just calculate which team is the greatest distance from the origin, and they win. It's all very straightforward. I can't believe they haven't implemented this, right? You can use arguments to solve arguments. And so, if you're trying to spot your favorite team, there you go. And so I think that you've already gotten more sport than you were expecting. Don't be disappointed, right? And so you can plot great things in 2 dimensions. And if, in this case, you've done all the combinations of 0 and 1, then what you've actually done is plotted the coordinates of the corners of a square. We can do the same thing in 3 dimensions. We've now got 3 different directions we can move. We've got up and down, left, right, and now you've got out. And so this is the reality we live in, right? We have 3 directions we can move, up and down, left and right, and out and back. And then combinations of those. So we can go across and out, or we could just take a shortcut there. And if you put on every combination of zeros and ones when you've got 3 coordinates, and so in science this happens quite a bit. You do an experiment with 3 different types of data, you can plot it on a 3D plot. But if you join together all the combinations of zeros and ones on a 3D plot, you get the corners of a cube. And you could now do this 1 dimension higher. If you had a 4D plot, and the problem here is we can't imagine that, because for a 4D plot you'd have left and right, up and down, out and back, and then another direction that we just can't even try and visualize, which is a real shame. But it would be very useful. In science, you do experiments where you have 4 different things you're measuring. If you've got 4 different types of data you want to plot on the same graph, you need a 4D plot. And you can do this, but sadly you can't see it easily, so you lose that visual link. But there is still there are a few ways that you can visualize what a 4D cube will look like. And I'm going to try and show you tonight what a 4D cube would seem like. And to do that, what's really handy is to imagine how we would show a 3D cube to a 2D creature. So if you had a 3D cube and you wanted to show it to someone who's perfectly flat, right, you could take a cube. One way is to take your cube and then unfold it into its net. So that is one way to go down a dimension. You can take a 3D cube and unfold it into its net. In fact, what I have here is a video of a net folding and unfolding into a 3D cube. Oh, I'm not trying to patronize you, but are we all happy that is a video of a 2D net folding into a 3D cube? Okay. No, well, mixed, okay. Because it's not. That is not a video of a 2D net folding into a 3D cube. That is a video of the shadow of a 2D net folding into a 3D cube, right? At the top there, I've got the 3D cube. I can then unfold it into its 2D net. All I was showing you before was the bit underneath. You can see there's a light above it, and it's casting a shadow onto that flat surface. But your brain is so used to things being in 3D that when I showed you the bottom bit, your brain imagined the top bit. Oh, you are, of course, now watching this projected on a wall, but don't think about it for too long, right? And so just take the essence, okay? Right, so what you're looking at the bottom there is the shadow of what's happening above it. But you could reconstruct the situation above just by watching the shadow underneath. And what's great is just like 3D objects can cast 2D shadows, 4D objects can cast 3D shadows. So even though I cannot show you an actual 3D object, what I can show you is the 4D object. What I can show you is the 3D shadow of that 4D object. And so what I've got here, this is our 2D net of a 3D cube. What I have over next to it is the 3D net of a 4D cube. And just like before, you could watch the shadow of this one folding up 1 dimension higher. I'm now going to show you the 3D shadow of the 3D net folding into a 4D cube. And it looks a little bit like this. And it goes and over. That's not so bad. Now, if you watch the one you're used to, if you start feeling a bit queasy and a bit dimension sick, right? Look at this side, because this one's okay, this is safe. And if you think about it, when the lid turns over onto the top of the cube, on this one we're used to, it looks like, in the shadow, it looks like it stretches around. And we know it's not stretching around, we know it's just turning over. But when it turns over 1 dimension higher, its shadow looks like it's stretching. So over here, that purple cube at the top is not stretching over, it's turning over. But when a cube turns over in 4D, it can look like it stretches around in 3D. And the actual moment it's folded together, it looks like this here. That is the 3D shadow of a 4D cube, but because it's a shadow, it's been cast in such a way that it's got perspective. So that blue cube in the middle is actually the same size as the red cube on the outside, except it's further away in 4D. And when things get further away in 4D, they look smaller in 3D. Just like if I showed you this, you all know the blue square is smaller than the red square. You go, well, of course the blue square is smaller than the red square. It just is the same size. It just looks smaller because it's further away. So you know red square, blue square, same size, but one looks smaller in its shadow because of perspective. In fact, if you set this cube rotating, they take turns being the big one. Right, so the blue one's big, and then the red one's big, and it looks like they're going through each other, but they're not actually going through each other, they're going in front and behind. But if you just look at what's happening on the screen, the red and blue are at the same place quite a bit. They look like they're going through there. And then they take turns getting big and small. I can do the same thing. I can take the 3D shadow of the 4D cube, and then I can set the 4D cube rotating. And it looks like this. So now they're taking turns being bigger and smaller. But they're not actually bigger or smaller. They're both still the same size all the time. They're just getting closer and further away in 4D. And they look like they're going through each other. But they're not going through each other. They're going in front and behind, one dimension higher. But when they go in front and behind in 4D, from our, pathetic 3D point of view, it looks like they're going through each other. At this point, if your head's not hurting, you're not paying attention. All right. Unfortunately, it now gets worse. So, if you want to try this yourself at home, you can build higher dimensional cubes out of straws. All right, I strongly recommend you do this. In fact, if you want to start with a 1D cube, to build a 1D cube out of straws, pick up a straw, and you're done. There you are. 1D cube, commonly referred to as a line. I'm going to use red for the first dimension. If you then add some more straws, you can make a square. So I've still got the red going one way, the blue now goes the other way. If you bring in a third color, I've got yellow, you end up with a cube. And if you then get another cube and join it together at all possible corners to this one, you get a, that is the same thing. I forgot, this is a new model I just made. Right, that is the same cube, but I've done it with perspective. So that's a perfectly flat shape, but it looks like a 3D cube from perspective. Because what you can do one dimension higher is you can make the wireframe model of a 4D cube. That's without perspective, and then this is with perspective. So I've shrunk down one of the cubes and popped it in the center. And so you end up with this all the edges, all the corners, everything's there of a 4D cube, but built out of straws. Oh, pipe cleaners. Use pipe cleaners for the corners. You just twist two of them together, cut off the extra bits, and you've got a nice way to hook the
revenge. Nightmare.